Dear participants and speakers, good morning and welcome to our conference, The Role of Media in Shaping Our Understanding of Human Trafficking, Compassionate Communication in a Global Media Landscape. My name is Edi Mojai and I'm a senior advisor at the Task Force Against Trafficking in Human Beings here at the Council of the Baltic Sea States.
And I'm Vineta Palatsida, Senior Advisor for Safe and Secure Region Priority at the Council of the Baltic Sea States. And we both will be guiding you through today. And we also have with us Madeleine Sundell, a human rights lawyer. She will join us a bit later today.
The event today takes place within the frame of our THALIA project. And it is co-organized by us at the Council of the Baltic Sea States and Södertörn University in Stockholm. The THALIA project, funded by the Swedish Institute and the CBSS Project Support Facility, looks into how the media reporting on issues of human trafficking affects the way we all understand this issue, both as a crime but also as a phenomenon. Most people will likely never encounter human trafficking and the crime themselves and may not have sufficient awareness on these issues. Against this reality, the media has a very crucial role to play when it comes to functioning as an awareness raiser and to shed light on the stories and coverage affecting human trafficking for all forms of exploitation.
We need to involve not only media and established journalists, but also universities in raising awareness about human trafficking. And this is exactly what we did in this project. We engaged students and teachers of journalism in a conversation about human trafficking and ultimately sought to raise better awareness on trafficking for all forms of exploitation among future journalists.
And the conference today marks, of course, the ending of our THALIA project, but it also marks the beginning of a new partnership established between us as an international organization and universities in our region with the purpose of raising the awareness of human trafficking among future journalists. We thank you all for joining us today, and we promise you very interesting discussions during the course of the day, and while also hoping that the event will inspire you to initiate new partnerships with academia as well as journalists in your countries, but also internationally.
And now we are happy to give the floor to our Director General, Grzegorz Poznański. Good morning, Grzegorz. How are you today?
Vineta, Eddie, thank you very much. Well, before you will go into discussions, and I really hope that they will be extremely interesting, let me address you with a couple of words. Dear participants, dear journalists, students, teachers, experts on human trafficking, it is my real pleasure to welcome you on this online conference today, which is organized by our CBSS Task Force Against Trafficking in Human Beings. The task force works tirelessly to counter human trafficking in the Baltic Sea region through international cooperation among 11 member states and through hands-on anti-trafficking projects aimed at strengthening the ability of professionals on the local, national, and international level to confront and address this crime. The human trafficking phenomenon is complex and cross-cuts through different areas such as economy, migration, human rights, and crime prevention, while leaving the ones exploited by this crime in a deeply vulnerable position and often forgotten. The need not only identify human trafficking, but also shedding light on this crime so that victims are assisted and perpetrators are prosecuted is more important now than ever before. The Task Force for Trafficking of Human Beings in the CBSS has throughout the years managed to set up an effective cooperation with relevant anti-trafficking key players and partners needed to curb this serious crime in the Baltic Sea region and beyond. However, it is evident that our partnerships needs to be expanded and must include stakeholders that can help raise attention to the issue of human trafficking, as well as give new perspectives on how to fight this crime. Such actors are journalists and universities. Today, the conference marks the culmination of the THALIA project, which Eddie and Vineta described briefly before. And this project seeks to explore the role of media in shaping our understanding of human trafficking, but also it marks the beginning of the new partnerships with journalists and students and teachers of journalism in the universities in the Baltic Sea region. The THALIA project emerged from an initiative of the CBSS task force against trafficking in human beings in 2019, when it was decided to conduct country studies looking into the media framing human trafficking in our member states. The conclusions from these studies provided us with much needed empirical overview of the media reporting in the Baltic Sea region. We are able to identify solid examples of compassionate, informed, and inclusive stories on human trafficking that were covered by the media. It was nevertheless also alarming to note examples which risk enforcing stereotypical structures or false imaginaries of what human trafficking entails. False perceptions and stereotypical understandings of the human trafficking phenomenon might ultimately result in victims not being identified, or even worse, re-traumatized, and perpetrators not prosecuted. Against this background, we saw a need to partner with academia and more specifically journalists, students, and teachers. Most citizens or professionals will knowingly never encounter trafficking. Most of them receive their information, the main information on the topic, from media reporting. The need for accurate and compassionate media reporting is therefore crucial in order for this crime to be accurately portrayed and to avoid stereotypical or insensitive reporting that may ultimately harm victims or create false imaginary of what trafficking in human being is. In our project THALIA, the CBSS has partnered with the journalist faculties of the universities in our member states, and mainly with the Södertörn University in Stockholm. The purpose is to raise awareness among journalist students on the topic of trafficking by allowing them to meet with established journalists from our region, experienced in covering the topic of trafficking in human beings during seminars and workshops. Today, I'm very proud to note that so far within the frame of the THALIA project, around 500 students of journalism in our region have participated in interactive activities, exploring role of media when it comes to shaping our understanding of human trafficking. With this project, we did not only want to communicate a message to journalist students on the importance of human trafficking. We wanted to include them in the conversation and mutually learn from each other's perspectives and experiences. Finally, the THALIA project launched a call for contributions where journalist students in our region were encouraged to send us journalistic pieces on the topic of human trafficking, such as articles, films, podcasts. The response was impressive, and all of the received contributions, we managed to select 3 winning contributions from journalist students in Estonia, Lithuania, and Ukraine, which you will hear more about later today. I would like to already now to extend my sincere congratulations to these winning students. We are truly impressed by your work. It is journalist students of today who tomorrow will be journalists working in local newspapers, national investigative shows, and international newsrooms. And they will need to partner up with those, and then we will need to partner with them to raise awareness of this serious crime. The new strategic and operative partnership with journalism and academia are necessary to form informed societies, science-based policies, and true collaborative networks to effectively fight human trafficking. Let's have this in mind going forward together. I wish you an interesting and inspiring and rewarding day, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Grzegorz, for highlighting the engagement of our organization. the Council of the Baltic Sea States, when it comes to building partnerships. And also thank you for reminding us that new partnerships will also provide us with new perspectives in the long run. That will ultimately help us to strengthen our general anti-trafficking response. Thank you for that. And indeed, the journalist students of today will be the journalists of tomorrow that will help make a positive impact and make a difference when it comes to shedding light on this serious crime that human trafficking is. Thank you very much, Grzegorz.
Thank you.
We now move on with some remarks from Anna Ekstedt, the Swedish government's ambassador at large for combating trafficking in persons. God morgon, Anna. Thank you very much for being with us today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thanks. Happy to be here together with you this morning.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Anna, you spoke at the UN high-level meeting in New York, discussing the global plan of action to combat trafficking in persons. The plan of action speaks specifically about expanding partnerships, such as academia, journalism, and so on, with the purpose to fight trafficking. Can you please tell us something on what the conclusions from New York at the high-level meeting were, and why is this important today, relevant in a more global setting?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. First of all, of course, I would like to thank you for inviting me and distinguished participants and dear colleagues. Thanks to the Task Force Against Trafficking in Human Beings for allowing me to be here and share some thoughts on the role of partnerships, and especially between media and academia in addressing trafficking. As we are aware, trafficking is a despicable and serious crime that violates the rights of its many victims, and we see that people are being exploited for different forms of exploitation, such as sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, forced criminality, forced begging, forced marriages, organ removal, etc. Unfortunately, the list of exploitation is long. And it's clear that we all need to do our utmost to enhance our prevention efforts in this field, and also have the ambition not only to address trafficking, but also to end this crime. It is unfortunately, though, clear, which was also raised during the UN high-level meeting the other week, that we're not doing enough to prevent trafficking and protect victims of this crime. Data show us from the UN as well as the EU that far too many people in the world are being exploited as victims of trafficking, and the vast majority of them are women that are being exploited for sexual purposes, and far too many are children. We have also seen that the phenomena has increased and worsened during the COVID-19 pandemic due to lockdowns and closed schools. People have been put in even more vulnerable situations, especially than women and girls, and traffickers have been highly adaptive, changing their modus in order to recruit and exploit vulnerable individuals from the growing risk groups. We also see more and more that recruitment as well as exploitation are increasingly taking place online, and it's crucial now that we focus more on the online dimension of trafficking, both in our prevention activities and protection, prosecution, and partnership activities. And it's clear also now when the societies are opening up again that we need to have a whole of society approach that also takes account of the gender dimension and has gender sensitive responses and legislation. And in this work, prevention efforts are key, and successful prevention requires knowledge sharing with a wide range of actors, similar to what you have done within the THALIA project. Partnership should not only focus on protection and prosecution measures, as we see within national referral mechanism, etc., but we also need to have partnerships specifically focusing on prevention. And there we see that schools, media, youth organizations, and academia and the health sectors can play a very crucial role in changing norms and negative gender stereotypes. And as you mentioned, Eddie, the UN high-level meeting on trafficking in persons was held the 22nd to the 23rd of November now in New York. The meeting focused on the appraisal of the UN Global Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons, and a joint political declaration was agreed on by all the member states during the meeting. The political declaration clearly underlines the importance of strengthening the collective action by member states to end trafficking in persons, and to do that with cooperation between international, regional, and sub-regional organizations, but then also partnering up specifically then with the private sector, the media, academia, parliamentarians, and civil society. So in that sense, your project is really on target. The declaration further then underlines the importance of tackling the online dimension and the misuse of internet in exploiting victims, and also encouraging partnerships in technology solutions to target trafficking. The declaration further reminds all the UN member states about their obligation to address the demand that fosters trafficking in human beings for all its forms, following Article 9.5 in the UN Palermo Protocol against trafficking. During the high-level meeting, there were also two specific panels that focused on the online dimension and the demand. And these are priorities that are clearly in line with also the Swedish priorities, and was also highlighted in the Swedish keynote during the meeting. There is overall an increased attention on addressing the demand, and this is of course highly welcome and needed. We see that it's not only on UN level, but more and more actors and also member states realize that this phenomena can only be stopped if we do address the demand. We need to do this and not only sort of acknowledge the fact that trafficking exists due to the fact that there is a demand for exploitation of people and that someone is paying for this, but also we need to react and act on this. And the new EU strategy that came earlier this year outlines that the Commission will assess the possibility also of establishing minimum EU rules criminalizing the use of exploited services of victims. And we also see on the OSCE level, we also hear discussions about addressing the demand for all forms of exploitation. And I think here, especially media and academia can play a very important role in the way how demand is being explained, and also how we reach out in society on prevention measures. And of course, this needs to be without influencing the free media, but via mutual learning between each other, how we can help to push the work in this arena forward. We need to see informed articles and discussions in media that can help us to change both prejudice in these forms, norm, and negative attitudes. It can also be a further remove an obstacle for disinformation. We can also see that media has specific roles both in countries of origin and countries of destination, how we talk about the risks of trafficking and also how we talk about the role of the demand in countries of destination. And as you are aware, trafficking in human beings is a multidimensional and complex phenomena that relates to both gender equality, violence against women, violence against children, organized crime, migration, labor rights, and human rights. We therefore need to have informed discussions in this field. And here also language and terminology, how we use it, is extremely important. We often see misunderstandings and mix of concepts. For example, when it comes to smuggling and trafficking, we see that these two terms are used interchangeably and not always correct. And this, of course, influences how a case that is presented in media is also then perceived by the public. We also see a tendency to focus on the situation or on the acts of the victims rather than the perpetrators and the users of the victims and the traffickers. This is also when it comes to begging and labor exploitation, that we rather would see that we focus on the perpetrator rather than that is exploiting people, rather than going into the fact that the workers were here without accurate working visas, etc. And this is very important. This is a discussion that we also see when it comes to violence against women in general, that we should highlight the role of the act of the perpetrator rather than the victim. We should also be very careful about labeling and how we talk about these issues, and also stick to internationally agreed language in this field when it comes to trafficking, and remind us about the fact that the UN Protocol against Trafficking, as well as the CEDAW Convention, talks about the exploitation or prostitution of others when it comes to trafficking for sexual exploitation. We also need to make sure that the language used is gender sensitive and non-discriminatory and non-racist as well. We know that these are highly gendered issues. Men are the predominant purchasers of sexual services, users or victims of trafficking, whether that services be provided by women, girls, LGBTI people, men or boys. And most people in prostitution are women. And this is also something that should be reflected when we discuss this with media and academia. And media can, of course, also have an important role in explaining the elements of trafficking for forced labor, and how it's all interrelated with labor law in general and workers' rights, etc. And also very much when it comes to reporting on the online dimension. We can inform the public about the risks and available prevention schemes. And with enhanced knowledge of the spread of information on child exploitation and how women are being exploited in prostitution and trafficking for sexual exploitation, we can avoid sort of negative reporting and also assess the role and also push platform providers in a positive direction. Prevention is also very much about changing norms. And here, for example, media can play a role in working together with schools when it comes for example, for comprehensive sexuality education in society. We see that this is an important tool in addressing trafficking, and media could work together with school in these prevention schemes, etc. But clearly, we all need to do much more in this field to address trafficking. Sorry, I lost my notes here, a classic. Let's see. I'm just about to finish, don't worry.
No problem.
Just wanted to sort of also say that no matter what our national laws also look like, it's important that we all have this obligation to address the demand for trafficking. This follows by the UN protocol as well as the Council of Europe Convention and the latest EU directive. And we should all address all the forms that fosters trafficking, all forms of exploitation. And this needs to be done, whether it's via legislation or other measures. And here really media and academia can help us in this debate and in this discussion. We also we all have an obligation also to protect victims of trafficking. And following international law, victims of trafficking have the rights to be identified, supported, and protected from further abuse. Victim services need to be sufficiently funded and available independent if they are being provided by NGOs or state and municipalities. And it's also a question how we communicate around these obligations. I also just wanted to say something about working with survivors and being informed and also having policy informed by survivors. Sweden has, during its OSCE presidency, funded the establishment of the ODIHR ISTAC, International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Committee, they have a crucial role in informing about trafficking, the phenomena, and also the prevention measures needed. And these voices are, of course, important to lift in a respectful and cooperative way by media and academia. Compassionate reporting is crucial. We cannot accept the abuse that victims of trafficking are facing today and that people are indifferent to their situation. With informed and respectful media coverage, the perspective can absolutely change. A lot has been done in terms of legislation, cooperation models, capacity building, and allocation of resources, both on national, global, and regional level, also in the CBSS region. Now we just need to do our best to sort of find the flaws and loopholes and also properly address the obstacles for successful prevention, identification, and the ultimate protection of victims. And it's clear that addressing the demand and the online dimension needs to be at the heart of attention in all our future joint efforts. And here media absolutely and also academic can play a crucial role in passing the message forward and also pushing the agenda ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's really reassuring to hear that expanding and strengthening partnerships is a priority also in a global setting. And your comments on the need to prioritize prevention, address demand, involve the whole society, and also the effects words and language have when describing and portraying human trafficking sets the tone perfectly for today's discussions. These are the issues we want to explore and discuss further during the day. Thank you again for being with us today. Very nice to see you on the screen. Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Gustav Amberg, Vice Chancellor at Södertörn University. Södertörn University is co-coordinator of the THALIA project. Mr. Amberg, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for your support and engagement in this project. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and also I'm very glad that Södertörn can be a co-host of this meeting today. Since the Södertörn University has a vision statement it's 3 lines long, but the key words are to reflect on contemporary challenges and contribute to a sustainable societal development. And also, since we started in 1996, we have had a particular theme for our research, and that is the societal development of the Baltic Sea region and the Eastern Europe. So the theme of this conference is really central to Södertörn, and we're really happy to be a part of it. So I'm going to speak just a little bit what Södertörn has been contributing to this, and I think the main activity of the project has been to organize these panel seminars in all the various participating countries, where students get to meet a variety of actors working with human trafficking, especially journalists with experience in reporting about the field. And it's a pilot project with 8 countries participating, and in each country a project team has consisted of representatives from state authorities and or civil society organizations, and there of course the CBS's network has been very important in bringing this together, and also journalism, universities, journalism departments in the different countries. And these panel seminars have been successfully launched, and as the Director General said, about 500 students have been participating in this way. I think this is also an example that trafficking, as Anna Ekstedt just said, is in human beings is certainly very much a cross-border phenomenon, and it calls for cross-border collaborations between all actors in this, such as, well, also journalists and media. And this is what the project has been doing. We have developed pedagogical activities where the students get the chance to understand the interconnected character of the field. And also, as Anna just said, research shows that when we talk or report about trafficking, most often it is connected with prostitution. But it still is important to acknowledge that trafficking in human beings is a wider concept than this. It is a problematic part of the transnationally interconnected society, the global community that we all live in, and where different effects cause people to end up in precarious situations, being mistreated and harassed and exploited. So I think that the main contribution of Södertörn in this project has been on developing the pedagogical model of the panel seminar. And together with CBSS, we have been able to contribute at raising awareness of trafficking as a societal problem, and also addressing, of course, journalism and journalism students. For CBSS, addressing journalists during their educational and formative period has been an innovative way of working. And a benefit from Södertörn's perspective in working with CBSS is that we could, of course, get access to the excellent networks of CBSS. Otherwise, this could not really have happened. So we could also think of this as a very fruitful way to collaborate between academia and organizations in this field. So, as being the last speaker in this introductory session, I have the advantage of not having to say everything. So I think I will be conclude there, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gustav. Reflect on contemporary challenges, I think, sums up very much the essence of our joint project. So thank you for those words. This project would not have happened if it was not due to the involvement of Södertörn University, which has been a very dedicated and innovative university to cooperate with, along with its students and teachers. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
We thank our opening speakers, and in any minute now we would get ready to begin with our discussions on the important role of media when it comes to shaping our understanding of human trafficking. And we will have a panel of very experienced journalists experienced in covering these topics. But before that, I think I'm ready for some coffee break. How do you feel?
Oh, I am surely ready. Dear participants, enjoy your coffee or tea, but don't go too far, because we want to see you all back here at 10:15. See you soon.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had the time to stretch a bit after this break and to grab some coffee. Before we continue, I would just like to remind and encourage all participants with us today to write in the questions you have for our speakers. And this you can do by clicking on the Q&A button, which is available in the platform which you are logged into at the moment. Please do not hesitate when you have the chance to ask journalists, anti-trafficking stakeholders, and so on. You can do this from the moment we start our first panel. So we really look forward to your questions. We will finish each panel with a 10 to 15 minute long Q&A session for our speakers. But let's not delay further, and let's start with our first panel discussion of the day, called Reporting on Trafficking in Human Beings as a Journalist, Challenges and Best Practices in Covering Complex Topics. It is rather obvious already at this point that media and journalists need to be further included in the discussion on what human trafficking is and entails. And although it's not up to us as states or international organizations to instruct media on how to cover certain issues such as human trafficking, it's very clear that we do see a need to partner up with the journalists to further shed light on these issues. And when preparing for this event today, we, on a very early stage, agreed that we really need to have a group of experienced journalists with us who can discuss issues such as stereotypical and sensationalist reporting on human trafficking, do's and don'ts for future journalists wishing to approach this topic, and a general discussion on how this issue should be understood from a broader point of view. And to discuss this today, we have an excellent panel with us, consisting of three very experienced journalists. We have Mr. Fabio Teixeira, who is the Brazilian trafficking and slavery correspondent for the Thomson Reuters Foundation. He's worked for national newspapers such as the O Globo and has a postgraduate degree in investigative journalism at the Brazilian Association of Investigative Journalism. Welcome, Fabio. And then we have Paavo Teitinen, who is a multi-award-winning journalist from Finland who has been working at Helsingin Sanomat, which is one of the largest daily newspapers in the Nordic, since 2014. And Paavo has unveiled human trafficking stories in Finland, and his stories had a very huge impact in Finland. And last but not least, we have Mr. Jan Wiese, who's a journalist at Rundfunk Berlin-Brandenburg, and a part of the very inspiring cross-border journalism project, which is called Lost in Europe, and that has investigated migrant children gone missing in Europe. So welcome all. I will start by asking all three of you one larger and broader question so that the audience today can get to know you a bit and also get to know the stories you've been working on. And then we will take it from there. So I will begin with a more international perspective on reporting on human trafficking by talking to Fabio from the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And Fabio, as I understand, you are in Brazil, and I guess you woke up. What time is it where you are at the moment?
It is 6 a.m. basically.
6 a.m. Well, we really appreciate the dedication and taking the time to participate at this event. But Fabio, I would like to ask you, the Thomson Reuters Foundation is in many ways a role model when it comes to covering human trafficking. The wide range of human trafficking and human trafficking related stories reported by the Thomson Reuters Foundation and by yourself is very impressive, to say the least. But I wonder, where does the idea of covering the topic of human trafficking so vigorously come from, when there are so many other important topics that also deserves attention? Fabio, please, the floor is yours.
Sure. So here at the foundation, our main objective was to report on underreported stories, and human trafficking and slavery are severely underreported. So it made sense for us to make it an area of a focus for us. So we set up a team in 2018 of 8 correspondents around the globe in many countries where the issue is most pressing. And we decided to focus on the issue. We have been doing that for over 3 years now, over 3 years now. And we are currently transitioning to cover a broader range of issues and how human trafficking and slavery connects to those issues, like how climate change can force people to migrate, which makes them more vulnerable to human trafficking and to being put in severely bad work conditions. And we are undergoing this transformation right now. But human trafficking and slavery is still very much in our minds. Just to give you an example, I'm currently on the field for a story on how workers in Brazil get pushed into slavery to work on the deforestation industry here. So this is one form of slave labor where it's not just bad for the workers, it's also bad for the environment. And this is one of the things that we will focus more and more on for the next few years. But as I said, we have been doing this for so long now that I can't even list all of my stories. But over the years, we did stories on how cults here in Brazil use slaves to make money. We did a story on how trans women are forced into prostituting themselves to pay for surgeries to alter their bodies to make them more feminine. Well, we did stories on how some Brazilian commodities are propped up by slave labor, like coffee, like ethanol, which is a sustainable fuel. We just released the story. And we did a major investigation on how the Brazilian government has a humanitarian program that was basically relocating Venezuelans in Brazil and sometimes putting them in a situation that could be considered slavery. So it's Brazilian government through inaction and just shitty governance, putting people into a situation where they could be exploited by Brazilian companies. So it's an incredibly broad range of subjects we can tackle into the field of human trafficking. There are no shortage of stories in Brazil or in other countries. So that's basically it. And for such an underreported field, it's impressive how much we can do with it. Like, it's not just the usual basic story of migrants being abused. There is so much more to it that we can explore, and there's so much more complexity that we can figure out from this field of work that we have inserted ourselves into. So basically that's it from me. I don't know if I answered your question correctly, but if I didn't, feel free to do a follow-up.
You did. I very much thank you for this broader background. We will use the first questions as a starter, as a base for our discussions, but I already now, based on what you said, have a short follow-up question. You mentioned the very important nexus between climate change and migration and how this ultimately can affect human trafficking, which I think is very relevant. With that said, what kind of response do you receive from regular citizens or Brazilian citizens, or do you get any reactions from the political sphere, as the topics you mentioned are somewhat politicized and go a bit broader than, so to speak, just human trafficking? What's the response you get from your stories?
Yeah, it is an issue. It's not an issue in a way that it is for other countries where migration is so politicized. Especially because here in Brazil, migration is not that big of an issue. We don't really close down our borders because we don't receive that many migrants. But when we bring up slavery, there are a group of more right-wing people here that believe that slavery is not a real thing, that human trafficking is not a real thing, that is just a way for people to try to get more money from their employers. So we have to tackle that. We have to be able to show people that the conditions that the workers are in are actually terrible, are actually slavery. That is not just us saying it. And the interesting thing about climate change is that I think people are more, sometimes people are more concerned about the environment than they are about the people. So if you say that some industry is leading to deforestation, I think at least in Brazil and sometimes abroad, people are more concerned about that than about the people that are doing the deforesting and that are in a situation where they are being kept as slaves and that are not that are being abused and are in danger for their lives and forced to do it. So it's difficult to be able to bring light to a subject where sometimes people care more about the tree falling in the forest than about the person dying in the forest.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Fabio, for walking us through why these issues are reported by the Thomson Reuters Foundation and the obvious impact they have. I think your international and large outreach with your articles and the stories that come along really help raise awareness on these issues. It is clear we will move on, but we'll come back to you later, Fabio. So it is clear that sensible reporting that has a large outreach can truly lead to impact. And this brings me to my next speaker, Paavo Teitinen from Helsingin Sanomat. And Paavo, your stories on human trafficking for both sexual and labor exploitation in Finland had a very evident political and social impact and really affected the debate. Can you brief us on one of these stories, and why do you think that your articles had the impact they had? Please.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation. So let me say a few words about both of them. Mostly about the stories on labor exploitation, because I think they highlight a sort of more structural, larger societal point. So the articles I initially did about labor exploitation had to do with Nepalese restaurants. They were published a few years ago, and basically what the first article showcased was that there is widespread and systematic exploitation of Nepalese cooks in Nepalese restaurants in Finland. Nepalese restaurants, which for various reasons, there are a lot of those in Finland. Per capita, I think there's more Nepalese restaurants in Finland than almost anywhere in Western Europe or the US. And so what the article showed was that there is this network of basically that covers almost all of the restaurants in Finland that is run by a very tight-knit community of restaurant owners, many of which come from the same region in Nepal initially. And what they do is, and what they've done for years, is they lure people into coming here. People often have to pay extremely large sums to get the job. It can go up to 20,000 euros. When people get here, they often have to work for a long time with no pay or extremely small pay, around the clock, sometimes with no days off, no access to healthcare. If you get sick, you might be thrown out of the country. People might be housed in poor conditions and so forth. Sometimes they might be threatened with violence, but often, it's enough to threaten them with just kicking them out of the country because the people are tied to their job. And so the first article sort of showcased this, and it caused some uproar. It initially improved the labor conditions of the cooks. Tens of cooks sought help from an NGO that helps victims of human trafficking, Victim Support Finland. And there was some, public discussion. It impacted the new government's program. The interior minister commented and blah, 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 these sorts of things. But nothing was really done about the exploitation. So then I wrote another article. It was a follow-up article exactly a year later, where the point of the article was that this is still going on, that nothing has been done about this. And that article, in that article, I tried to zone in even more on the structures that sort of help this type of exploitation sustain itself, that make it possible to exploit people in this manner in Finland, because the first article focused more on just sort of proving that this happens. And the structures are related to the way that our system works when it comes to residence permits, how people are sort of tied to their job, and it's extremely easy to threaten them or kick them out and force them to work in conditions that sometimes look like modern slavery. And that follow-up article had more impact. That contributed to the creation of a new law which relates to residence permits, which is aimed at lowering the threshold for victims of human trafficking and similar exploitation to seek help without having to fear being kicked out of the country, either themselves or their family. And I think it also impacted, the police's human trafficking unit and other issues. I think the reason why these articles had an impact is that it was simply something that people didn't realize was going on in Finland. I didn't realize it either myself when I sort of started investigating this. There were many moments in the making of this articles where I was, it was hard to believe that this type of modern slavery can exist in a society like Finland, this rich welfare state, the envy of many, but it does. This sort of shadow society where the normal rule of law doesn't reach. I think that's why it caused such a wide public discussion and led to some real changes. And then I think why the follow-up article had such an impact was just this sort of outrage that nothing has been done about this. And for me as a journalist, I think it sort of reminded me that it's important to follow up on these topics, even though my bosses sometimes think that follow-up articles are not that interesting. You should expose something new, but I think it's extremely important that we follow up on the phenomena that we expose and sort of see if anything's being done about them. And then maybe just a few words on the article about, you mentioned the sexual exploitation. That had to do with this cult leader, a famous artist in Finland who had been recruiting girls, young women and underage girls to his cult, promising them, a bright future in his theater and other places. And I think that article was perhaps important because it highlighted, the sort of the structures that we have in place having to do with this different. I think it had a lot of similarities to, for example, the articles that had been done in Sweden about this person who was close to the Swedish Academy. Also some similarities to, Harvey Weinstein, maybe Jeffrey Epstein, these different sort of power imbalances that people in certain positions might have, especially in the arts, with regards to people who want to make it in that world. And I think that it also sort of expanded people's understanding of what human trafficking might look like. I want to talk later on the stereotypes often associated with this phenomena, but I initially didn't think this was a human trafficking article, but it definitely was. And we're still awaiting a decision on the case, but the prosecutor has asked for a 10-year prison sentence for the cult leader. So we'll see what happens with that.
Kiitos, Paavo. Thank you. I really recommend everybody to Google Paavo's story, which he referred to about labor exploitation, which is called The Long Shift. It's available in English. Don't Google now. We will still follow us in this discussion. But it's a very good story, and I really take with me your comment about the follow-up article and the kind of impact that had combined with the first article, because when we organized within the frame of this project national discussions with journalists, several journalists has specifically mentioned the possibility to include a follow-up article to actually ask the state agencies responsible, so what did you do in the recent months? Did you actually do something about this particular issue? So very, very good point. Thank you. So we take with us that the media coverage of human trafficking can reveal disturbing stories and hopefully have a political impact. It is also clear that journalists should be, well prepared and informed when approaching the issue of human trafficking, because it is an issue that ultimately involves victims, persons who have been severely exploited and/or traumatized, and sometimes these victims are children. I would therefore like to ask Jan, in Berlin, you have worked on stories relating to human trafficking in children. Can you please tell us about your story that you investigated? And when writing this story, when doing this story, were there any ethical factors that you took into consideration that you found were very specific to human trafficking? If yes, which were these ethical factors? Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. To be honest, a lot of what Paavo said reminds me of our own investigation. Because in the beginning, actually, it was not an investigation about human trafficking, but smuggling, and it was in the beginning not a story or an investigation about minors specifically, but about Vietnamese people, because. We, as we work in teams here, and I made the whole investigation together with my very good colleague Adrian Batocha, and actually he received the information from the German border police that in 2019 more and more Vietnamese people have been caught at the German-Polish border, which they have crossed illegally, and after being identified by the police, more or less, they vanished again. And that was the very, very starting point of our whole investigation. And we thought of it as smuggling because everybody talked of that like this. But as we dig deeper and deeper, then we came to realize that smuggling is actually not the right term, and that what is in place here must be human trafficking. But in the beginning, that was more kind of thesis, and then we started really to research, to collect the puzzles in order to prove that human trafficking of Vietnamese people is in place. Because you have to understand beforehand that actually in Germany there is no public discussion about human trafficking, especially about human trafficking of Vietnamese people. There is no real sensitivity, neither in the public realm nor in the politics or the law enforcement. So we really had a blank table, so to say. And so what we did then in order to prove our thesis was I cannot explain here the whole investigation, of course, but just to give some examples, we found many cases, also published cases of different kinds of exploitations of Vietnamese people all over Germany, such as labor exploitation in nail bars, sexual exploitation in so-called beauty parlors, people being locked in bunkers or houses, being forced to grow cannabis plants, and so on. And so we had here one necessary condition for human trafficking, which is exploitation, of course. And then we looked abroad to other European countries, and especially in the United Kingdom, it was interesting that there the Vietnamese group is the biggest non-European group of victims of human trafficking. And that was quite surprising for us because almost all of these Vietnamese people have been gone through Germany before. So it was extremely likely that Germany is a hotspot of trafficking too. In Poland, Adrian, who is born in Poland originally, so he speaks Polish as his mother tongue, he found a case at court in Poznan who dealt with a human trafficking gang consisting of one Vietnamese leader and 2 and 3 Polish drivers. And this gang alone brought hundreds of Vietnamese people to Germany in order to be exploited here. Later, we were able to interview one of the traffickers of this gang and also one of the victims of them as well. And then finally, we also found examples of underage Vietnamese boys and girls which had to sell illegal cigarettes here, were exploited in nail bars, as I said before, selling drugs and so on. Also, the border police told us that amongst the grab one at the border, a lot of them are minors being brought to certain shelters but vanish after minutes or days again, getting back into the hands of their traffickers. And then we tried or we made dozens of requests to police stations, youth shelters, and so on in order to get figures, to receive figures, how many children are have been at a shelter and vanished again. And we have to realize that the figures are completely inconsistent in Germany, that there is really a lack of a lack of good statistics, and actually that there is no real interest in the whole issue. Nevertheless, for example, for Berlin, the police told us that in the past 5 years, 500 children have been vanished, only Vietnamese children. So just some examples how we get to the conviction that human trafficking is in place here in Germany. And then we made first reports on a regional scale here in Berlin and Brandenburg, and afterwards we were asked to make a film on a national scale for our national broadcaster ARD. And that film, which was broadcasted in the beginning of 2021, was actually the first real publication about that problem, that human trafficking of Vietnamese minors is happening right in front of our doors. And you asked me of ethical factors. Actually, there are many, of course, but maybe I'd like to highlight 2 of them. Okay, the first one is, of course, as you mentioned before, people who have been tracked, victims of trafficking, had to face extremely terrible situations, and they started a journey in hope of a better life, not only for themselves, but of course for their family, which normally remains in Vietnam. And then they end up in situations which might be horrible, like being exploited, sexually exploited, and so on. And this becomes even graver when you are children, of course, because you can't cope with that experiences. And of course, what we had in mind, and what is the fact that experiences like this create shame in this people's mind, feeling bad because you didn't make it, feeling guilty, that you are trapped in a situation like this. And this, of course, made also our investigation extremely difficult because it was so hard to get in contact with victims of human trafficking. Just an example, or a striking example of that emotional stance of feeling ashamed was the young woman who died in this lorry close to London together with 38 other Vietnamese people, and who was in the moment of dying already choking. She wrote to her mom in Vietnam a text message saying, "Sorry, Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't make it, I can't breathe, I'm sorry, Mom." And she was not blaming anybody, not the traffickers, she was not blaming anybody but herself for not making it. And that was, that is the your stance you are confronted with when working on this topic. And we had to bear that in mind all the time, of course. And another ethical factor, I think, is that you also have to bear in mind that normally the victims of trafficking are in fear of their traffickers, because they, even if they are caught here by police and are sheltered somewhere, they are still in the hands of their traffickers because they are kept in debt bondage. Of course, these traffickers know where your family lives in Vietnam, and so they actually there must have been, must be done so much to really protect them and to protect the family in Vietnam that which isn't by the German state, by the way. So that this emotion of fear remains the whole time. And this dependence even, of course, gets graver when you talk of children, as they are alone here, not speaking German, not having anybody but the traffickers.
Obvious do's and don'ts to think of when approaching this issue, and also bearing in mind the vulnerabilities of the victims of this crime. This is a very difficult and delicate topic involving victims, different, migration, smuggling, migrants, and so on. So I would really like to continue on the focus on how we portray this crime and what that means for the imagery created when it comes to human trafficking. So I would like to move on, and in this respect, we can also see that words and terminology also affect how we perceive this crime and how it is portrayed. So I would like to ask Fabio again, as a journalist, taking on such a complex topic, how do you decide which terminology and which words to use when reporting on human trafficking? When you started working on this issue, for example, where were your go-tos, so to speak, when it comes to finding the correct words and terminology?
Yeah. This one is really hard because it's a constant struggle for us to the fight between being able to communicate clearly, to talk to people in a way that to talk to readers in a way that they will understand what we are saying, and being politically correct and legally precise. I'll give you an example. Here in Brazil, if you read any of my stories, you'll see the word slave or enslaved or rescued from slavery all over the text. But it's legally incorrect to use those words because Brazil has abolished legal slavery at the end of the 19th century. And if you look at our constitution, you'll see that we have a law against human trafficking and against slavery, but we don't call it slavery. We call it work in slavery-like conditions, because slavery was a legal term that we used to refer to people that were legally enslaved. So if slavery is abolished, we shouldn't be calling people slaves anymore. So there's a whole legal issue there. But imagine if we were to write every time we did a story, we had to write a worker was found in slavery-like conditions, or a worker was rescued from work in slavery-like conditions, because you have to be legally correct in this case. And we decided that we wouldn't do that. Obviously, if anyone quoted in a quote, obviously we will use the term that they are using, but we need to be able to communicate effectively what we mean when we say that a person was being held in a position where they were forced to do labor. And the word for that is slave. So we decided to use that. But there are also the opposite of that argument, is that when we have a term that is in theory correct, but in practice it evokes an image that we don't want to evoke, or that it seems that oversimplifies the issue, like sex slave. If you want to get clicks, you put sex slave in your headline. You'll definitely get a lot more clicks than in any other way. But we know that when we say sex slave nowadays, we're not getting into the reader's minds what we want to evoke to them. We are getting another image that was clearly created by the media. If we want to portray the workers, if we want to portray the situation that they are in, with a word that evokes to the reader what they are going through, we need to be clever, more clever than that. Like workers were forced to prostitute themselves. It's a longer word for sure, but it's a more neutral language. It doesn't get loaded with meaning that we don't want to have in a story like this. I hope I answered your question.
You did, absolutely. Very good examples. Sometimes taking the more, so to speak, boring and difficult road when it comes to even things as terminology may be worth it if the purpose is to actually communicate what the crime entails and what it means. Very good examples, very concrete. So the imagery of human trafficking is also forms depending on how it also forms how we understand this issue. Is it an issue? Is it a global issue threatening both individuals and societies, or is it an issue that should be strictly handled by law enforcement? So I would like to go back to Jan. In your story, you uncover that trafficking in Vietnamese children is ongoing in Europe. As you mentioned, it started as a smuggling story, but then the more you look, the more you learned, one might say. And as it involves both human trafficking as well as human smuggling, like the previous speaker, Anna Ekstedt, mentioned, these phenomena are sometimes intertwined, but sometimes, mistaken for each other. So having this kind of mishmash of smuggling and human trafficking, I would like to ask you, from your strict, journalist perspective, why should human trafficking be understood as a human rights issue and not an issue concerning, security and borders and so on?
Yeah, unfortunately, the terms are still often mistaken here in Germany, and we pursue our work to clarify the situation. But to your question, I think in terms of border issues, it's a quite simple answer, because human trafficking is possible without crossing any borders. For example, in the United Kingdom, the biggest group of trafficked people is British. So you really have to distinguish between human trafficking on the one side and crossing borders on the other. But of course, often human trafficking and smuggling is intertwined, as you need to cross borders. And here I think there is no real either or contradiction between looking at it as a security issue and a human rights issue. I think what is really important is to to distinguish as clearly as possible between the traffickers on the one side and the trafficked one on the other side. Because I think the traffickers, you can, of course, look at them with the security issue perspective, as they do not only smuggle trafficked people, but also other things like drugs or people. Of course, there is the possibility, theoretically, that they do not smuggle only trafficked people, but also criminals. And so it is, of course, completely okay, I think, to look at it with a security perspective. But if you talked about the trafficked ones, of course, they had to experience grave violations of their fundamental rights, of their human rights. And if you do not cover that, if you do not look at this, what normally happens, and what happened here in Germany is that these violations remain unseen completely, and that also these the trafficked people are understood only as perpetrators because they cross the border illegally. They are illegal migrants which have to be sent back, and the whole violation of their human rights is remains unseen. And on one hand, this does not cover the truth, which we as journalists try as best as we can to reveal, of course. So we should report about that in that way, because it happens. And also, I think if we do not report it as an human rights issue, then the responsibility European countries as modern societies being bound to human rights, not only morally but also legally, becomes blurred or unseen as well. And as it is our task to point at the flaws in our own societies, we need to show, of course, these violations of human rights, and that's why we have to report it in that way.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very clear response, and I appreciate it coming from your journalistic point of view on why human trafficking kind of legally and ethically should be understood as a human rights issue. We can note a certain shift, I would say, in many countries. When we did our country studies in 2009, looking into how media is being reported, we noted a shift where human trafficking is increasingly being reported as a security border kind of issue. So I really take with me your remarks. Thank you. We touched upon this fact several times, which is that human trafficking is a cross-cutting issue, including victims, perpetrators, and different related topics. And we also have been discussing about stereotypical description of, or let's say, victims. And Paavo, I would like to get back to you. In your story, we talked before about stereotypical portrayal of victims, but I would also like to ask about how we portray the perpetrators, and if that can be stereotypical also, because in your story, The Long Shift, an aspect that really caught my attention was how the perpetrators in the story were reported and portrayed. In the story, you portrayed the restaurant owners in Finland accused of trafficking for labor exploitation in a rather neutral way, one could say, focusing more on what they are guilty of rather than portraying them as inherently evil or something. So how do you find the balance between highlighting the very, severe actions committed by the perpetrators without becoming sensationalist about the whole thing? Please.
Yeah, I think this issue of how we portray this type of exploitation that both Joanna and Fabio talked about is extremely important, and I completely agree. I think that one thing I hope I've been able to do or contribute to with these articles in Finland is sort of impacting the way that people see this type of phenomenon and understand that modern human trafficking, modern slavery, if you will, is not something that perhaps you've learned in popular culture, or let's say it often isn't that, at least in Finland. It's a much more nuanced, more subtle phenomenon where the ties that bind people to these desperate situations are often, they can be more or less invisible. They can be dead relationships. They can be the fear of being kicked out. They can be different types of psychological control, for example. And more often than not, they're not this stereotypical idea of a woman being chained to a radiator in a basement, or the victim being sort of physically restrained. Of course, that happens too, but that's not what this exploitation to a large extent is, at least in the modern society. And I think that those types of stereotypical tropes are very harmful, both when it comes to the exploiters and the victims. If we don't understand that the victim of human trafficking can be, a loud Ukrainian construction worker who just wants to get his money, or some, big hairy Nepalese cook, and then it's hard for us to understand the phenomenon. And the same goes with the perpetrators. These people are not diabolical. They are charismatic, polite, well-mannered businessmen whose business relies on the exploitation of other human beings. They are often, for example, these Nepalese restaurant owners who, to my understanding, operate really a kind of like a mafia-like structure in Finland. They're often well-respected. They've won many awards, Businessman of the Year awards, things like that. And they're very nice when you meet them. But they're not that nice when you're not there, when they're treating their workers. And I think if we as journalists sort of play to these stereotypes, then we do a real misservice to understanding what this type of exploitation is and how it can be stopped. So I think that's, it's so easy, like Fabio was talking about these different ways we can cover this topic. It's so easy to just go to sort of the sensationalist route. But I don't think we should do it, and I don't think we have to. I think the substance in and of itself is so strong that you don't sort of need to build it up as a journalist. In fact, I think it can sort of turn against the story and be sort of counterproductive, because it sort of really doesn't. It hinders people's ability to understand what the exploitation can be about and what kinds of control we're talking about. So that's, in short, that's what I think about this issue.
There are no perfect victims and no perfect perpetrators. Very relevant remark, and also letting the substance of the article speak for itself. Thank you for that. A very good example on why, dramatic descriptions of perpetrators, as you mentioned, can ultimately risk harming the victims also. If this imagery of a perpetrator is somebody who is, diabolic or evil, we might risk missing the ones who are actually perpetrators, which could be anybody, so to speak, which was, I think, demonstrated in your story. The regular restaurant owner around the corner, who's always very nice, can also be a trafficker. Thanks for that. I would like to stay on the topic of balancing perspectives.
Can I add one small thing?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, just one more point. I think also if we make these stories of human trafficking too much about, for example, the evil perpetrator and the poor victim, then we sort of direct people's gaze towards just the exploiter and the exploited, when human trafficking is a problem of governments, of laws, of societal structures, of officials and the actions they take also. I mean, this is a phenomenon that can be stopped and can be revealed, and often it isn't because we are lacking in the way the government tackles it. So we should, what I try to do in these articles, and what I think journalists should try to do, is try to, while describing what's going on, is to focus the gaze on the structures that help this type of exploitation sort of stay afloat in society, without not hone in on the evil exploiter and the poor victim, even though that might be an easy route to go.
Yeah, Thank you very much. The focus on victim-perpetrator relation can very much function as a diversion from the actual root of the problem. Thank you. I would like to move on to Jan. As mentioned before, your story covered human trafficking in children, and this is a topic, as it involves children, which for us working on the issue might not be difficult to digest in itself, but for ordinary citizens who are not used to reading about or talking about this topic, the issue of trafficking in children can be very difficult to digest. And reading about it may be even more difficult. So when working on your story, did you ever think of the possibility or risk that this topic might be far too heavy for any readers to, read about, or did this in any way affect the way you approach the issue?
No, I don't think in general that we thought it would be too hard. But just as Paavo said before, and what we tried to do was not to tell just a story about exploiters and the exploited ones being children here, and not to be so emotional or only play the emotional card, which would be a bit mistake, I think, as well, because it would prevent everybody from understanding what is happening here and how it is possible, and that it is not only the evil traffickers and the poor trafficked ones, but also the structures making it possible, and these structures also belongs to our society. Generally what we tried to do, and I hope we did it as we tried to, was for the perpetrators as well, and as for the exploited ones, to show them as persons, not to use them in our film, for example, only as the protagonists with a certain dramatic function, being a victim, being a perpetrator, which happens, unfortunately, I think, a lot in TV documentaries. And that is, for example, in case of the victims, for me, that is a second victimization. If you use them only as victims, letting them say, oh, everything is so sad and I'm so lost. And we tried not to do that, but to show persons that you can get a feeling of that being, of that human being there, of its hope and hopes it still has, and its ideas of life. So although it's a difficult topic, of course, we haven't been afraid that it is too hard to digest. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have so far in this discussion been focusing on what to do and think of in order to report on in a compassionate and informative way as a journalist. But we know for a fact that there are a number of existing examples out there on when human trafficking has been reported in a way that can be very harmful to victims and even dangerous for them directly. So I would like to ask Fabio, from a more international overview, would you be able to give us a few examples, or any example of, examples of reporting on the issue that you have concluded has been, very negative or inaccurate when it comes to human trafficking? Have you seen such examples?
Yeah, there always are a number of examples that we can point to, but I think one very, very major one is the lack of cultural context for the people that are writing the stories about the people that are being trafficked. We sometimes look at those at the victims as through our own eyes, and we don't actually see that sometimes the situation that they are in, as bad as it is not as bad as the situation they were in before. Like, for example, here in Brazil, we have a very serious issue where Bolivian women end up in sweatshops making our clothes. But the reality of the issue is that as bad as the situation is here for them, it's not as bad as it is in Bolivia. It still is human trafficking, and it still is slavery, because the Brazilian law says it is, because we have very clear guidelines on what constitutes human trafficking and slavery, and we still need to put it as such, but we have to make clear that these people are not they're not just victims. They are trying to. They are actually in a situation that is that is actually better than their lives back home, which is something that is weird to fathom. And it goes for so many other things. Like it goes to go a little bit broader. I really am tired of reading stories about human trafficking that portray the victim as this saintly creature that came down from heaven to die for our sins, or people that have no agency at all. So I am actually on the field right now. I'm speaking to you guys from a hotel because I'm working on a story. And yesterday I was with labor inspectors when we were doing a rescue of a few people from a charcoal production site, and I was speaking to this worker, and he was in a terrible situation. He was found to be in slavery-like conditions, but he's still like a normal person. He still told me jokes. We spoke like usual. And I'm tired of not seeing that portrayed clearly in a story. I'm tired. It's harmful to us, to the subject as a whole, because when you just portray people as victims, you make it harder for the reader to empathize with them and to make clear that that these are people, actual people being put in the situation. And we need to be aware that exploitation does not limit itself to the final victims. It's the thing that I'm about to say is it's very weird. I think Pavel said something a little bit like it, but here in Brazil, there are some cases where the human trafficker is also a victim. Sometimes we find that the human trafficker, the person that is doing the transportation of victim exploited, is in a situation that is almost as terrible as the people that he's enslaving. So there are cases here in Brazil where labor inspectors not only rescued the victims, but also rescued the human trafficker himself. There's going to be, at the end of any supply chain, there's going to be a big company, there's going to be someone big responsible, but sometimes the people that get caught up as human traffickers are also deserve our pity, also deserve being treated as victims, which is something that I've almost never seen being done in any stories that I read.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think also learning from mistakes can also be valuable, precisely as you can learn from best practices when it comes to reporting. We have approximately, less than 20 minutes. I would really like to open the floor for some Q&A, and we have received several questions, actually. And perhaps I would like to start with a question that can be directed to all of you, and I would probably like to start with Paavo. This demands that you're all a bit transparent and honest with us today. And the first question is there any story, I will start with Paavo, is there any story that you have covered in an earlier stage, human trafficking or related, that you would have carried out differently today? If yes, how? Is it something you would have done in a different way? The question is.
Well, I think the story about the cult, which is sort of a hybrid human trafficking cult, sexual exploitation article. My regret is that I didn't sooner realize the extent of what was going on, and I guess if I could do it over again, I would cover it in a different way, in the sense that I would sooner focus on certain aspects of the story that I didn't sort of realize were there initially. But I guess that's human. Other than that, maybe in the first Nepalese article I did, where I was dead set on proving that this is going on in Finland. So I wouldn't settle for, the problem was that there had been stories about human trafficking, but they were often sort of individual cases, so this one pizzeria worker there, or this one construction worker there, or this one cleaner there. And I was worried that the article wouldn't sort of push through the public consciousness, because people would say these are just one individual case, one Nepalese restaurant. So I was dead set on proving the extent and the widespread nature of this exploitation. So I interviewed, I think, 20 Nepalese cooks, and I wouldn't settle until I was sort of satisfied that, okay, now I can show that this is actually extremely widespread. And also, of course, I had other sources as well. But I was so dead set on proving that this is going on and this is widespread that I didn't focus as much in the first article on the various structures that sort of help sustain it, whether it comes to residence, the way our residence permit system works, or the police works, or the extremely poor resources of the labor inspectors and things like that. I mean, they were sort of covered in the article, but between the lines in a sense. And I just sort of really zoned in on them only in the follow-up article. So if I could do it over again, I would focus even more on the structural issues in the first article, instead of just focusing more on proving that this is happening, which is of course important as well. Other than that, no, my biggest regrets are stories I've missed, yes. Things that I should write about, but I haven't so far.
Thank you very much. Hands-on example. But on the other hand, your dedication on proving trafficking somehow resulted in what it did. So very good job. Jan, do you have an example of a previous story you would have carried out in a different way had you done it today?
To be honest, really. Maybe just there was one thing I was not so confident about. That was that in this documentary we made, I think we did not cover good enough the grave issue of sexual exploitation for certain reasons, simple reasons, just that the film only could have 45 minutes and so on. And that was something I was really not so confident about, as sexual exploitation is so grave. But we did it afterwards in follow-up reports. We gathered new information after the broadcast of the movie. We get anonymous letters, for example, of beauty parlors being actually places of sexual exploitations here in Berlin, and so we could do that afterwards, and as TV reports, online articles, and radio reports as well. So all in all, I would not do something really different.
Thank you, Jan. Fabio, last comment on this question. Would you like to provide with an example?
Sure. Very recent. I did a story about how workers get exploited in the sugarcane business, and how that sugarcane eventually becomes ethanol, which powers cars in Europe and the US. And this story had so much going on. There's exploitation, there's a climate issue there, there's major companies, there's financing going from the World Bank. I was like, when I think about it, I think that sometimes when we are doing stories about a commodity like this, about ethanol, about sugar, about whatever, We can go as deep as we want on the international ties that it has, on how this benefits people, on how people benefit from slavery all over the world. And we can sometimes get lost in the woods about what actually happens to the workers on the end of it. So sometimes it's better to, if I could go back, I would maybe do a story focusing more on the workers, and then in subsequent stories bring the focus to how it connects to the rest of the ethanol industry, because you need to have a firm base of empathy for your stories. And when you throw everything together in a single bio, that's the human element, which is so necessary in stories like this, can get lost. So yeah, it's a very recent story, but looking at it now, I would do it differently.
Thank you very much for your contributions. Also, I think this question was very good, and it also kind of shows that regardless of how informed you are or how dedicated you are, regardless of the issue, there will never be such a thing as a perfect article or story when it comes to this. We have several questions, and we just got in a new question, which I think was very good. It's directed to everybody, but the question is, how can your journalistic work be spread to more countries? Are you a part of any journalistic trafficking network? Your angles and commitment is something that is needed in Sweden. Jan, you mentioned you're involved with the Lost in Europe network. Is this the main network you're involved in?
Yes. That is one network which is outside of our public broadcast structure, and this network is really important for our cross-border investigations. It has already been important for the investigation in the human trafficking of underage Vietnamese people. We had two very good colleagues in the Netherlands, for example, which helped us a lot making research there. But also inside our public broadcast system. For example, our film was broadcasted by the Deutsche Welle worldwide, being translated into English, of course, Arabic, and other languages. So it is already spread.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question. And please, to make this as easy as possible, just raise your hand if you think you would want to answer this, because I think the questions asked are relevant for all three of you. So the question is, on one hand, victims and survivors of human trafficking should be included in the work against trafficking, and their voice should be heard in the media. However, it can be very problematic approaching a victim in the middle of their recovery or in their trauma. What are your reflections on this? When is a good time to speak to a victim according to your experience? At what stage do you not interview a victim, for example? Anybody having any take on this? Have you interviewed in the victims, for example?
Well, I can say briefly that I don't think there's any simple formula to this. You have to evaluate each situation in their context. There are people who I've decided not to do a story on because of the condition they were in. And I think what's also important is that when you speak to people and you recognize they're in a difficult state of mind, they might be traumatized, they might be in a difficult place, that you sort of make the situation safe for them, and make sure that they, for example, understand that. What I've done is in some cases I've said that if you want to cancel the interview later on, it can be done, and some victims have done it. I interviewed one woman who was a victim of forced marriage and sexual exploitation, and after the interview she decided that she doesn't want to talk about her case because it's too painful, So we scrapped the article. So it's I think there's a balance. This, people have gone through a lot. It's not like talking to a journalist is the worst thing that will happen to them. You don't want to treat them like they're made of glass. At the same time, you want to be extremely sensible and make sure that they understand the, that there are options where it comes to pursuing the story. And one very brief point. You can consult experts. What I've done is I've talked to, for example, Victim Support Finland that helps victims of human trafficking. Talk with them about different stories I'm doing and what they think about interviewing certain people. And I think that's very important. I think in general, it's important to talk to, for example, NGOs or state agencies that are well versed in these issues. Something which we haven't had the time to cover in this panel, but which is very important when it comes to writing about this.
Thank you. If the victim is not possible to talk to the ones meeting and assisting the victim. Fabio, would you like to add something?
Yeah. Just first of all, I agree completely with Pavel. We don't have to treat people like glass. They are very resilient in most of the times, and they usually want to speak. The one thing that I think it's very important to make clear to them is how wide the reach of what they're saying to you is. My stories go on the Reuters wire. That's as wide as it gets. So you have to make clear to people that they are going to get known if they speak, and you have to make clear that they can go anonymous if they want. I always offer victims anonymity. Always, because we never know how much in danger they really are. So if they want to be anonymous, they can be anonymous. And sometimes, even if they want to go public, sometimes it's best to keep them anonymous.
Thank you very much. No set ingredients or setup for how to interview the victims and take into account the larger context, but also have in mind that victims often have agency. Very important words. We have 5 more minutes, and I'm going to do something that is very risky that you should not do, but I'm going to ask you all one final question, and I would firmly like you to answer in order, starting with Fabio, then Paavo, and then Jan. So if you, in one sentence, could say to journalist student what to think of before approaching this topic, what would that be? As short as possible. Fabio, please, you first.
Yeah. Know the legality of what you're doing. Know the legal definition of human trafficking and in slavery, because if you don't, you're gonna get sued.
Thank you very much, Paavo.
That's great advice. I have personal experience with that problem. I know the legal definition. I haven't been sued, but they tried. Okay. Let me quote the great journalist Seymour Hersh, who's since gone off the rails a bit, but he wrote in his memoir, "Read before you write," and I think that's a good general principle. Really understand the phenomenon and the topic. Talk to the real experts in the field before you write, because if you don't understand it, then you're going to miss important, crucial aspects and nuances of what you're writing about. You can always write something, but if you actually want to sort of do really good journalism, then get to know the topic really well.
Thank you very much. And finally, Jan, any last words to journalists?
I just can approve what Fabio and Paavo said, and maybe only add, you will need a lot of time, and unfortunately you will have to face a lot of frustrations, and so it's good to know that beforehand, but it's worth.
Thank you very much, and I think with that we have to make that our last question. I need to say, in all honesty, this is one of the most interesting panels I have moderated. Thank you very much. I have learned quite a lot. I will take with me both the good examples and the not so good ones when it comes to reporting on human trafficking. And also, please, I would like to ask everybody with us also today that remind them of that sensationalism can function as a diversion. So this will work against what you're trying to achieve with your reporting. I also think it's particularly important to bear with us that human trafficking, although may affect borders and security issues, but it is the human stories behind this horrific crime we need to keep telling, so that the measures introduced by our states and societies focus on addressing the vulnerabilities and structural problems instead of focusing on how to shut victims out. So thank you very much to Fabio, Paavo, and Jan for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
We will now go for a coffee break and a second stretch before lunch, and we will be back at 11:30, where we will listen to the panel Utilizing Media as a Partner Against Trafficking in Human Beings, experiences from crucial stakeholders in reaching out through the media. And at this panel, you will be in the hands of my colleague, Vineta Polazzide. So thank you all and see you very soon.
The key word of today's conference is partnership. And you just heard a very interesting panel and discussion among accomplished journalists. And now I would like to invite our good cooperation partners from international organizations, NGOs and state authorities to share their perspectives. I have here today with me 4 panelists. And hello and welcome. I would like to introduce you with Natalia Olus, Director of European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, affiliated with the United Nations. We have here Jakob Flirt, Secretary General of the NGO Child 10. Jakob is also Chairman of the Swedish Civil Society Platform Against Human Trafficking. We also have with us Tatiana Kotliarenko, Advisor on Anti-Trafficking Issues at the OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and Anu Leps, National Coordinator Against Human Trafficking in the Ministry of Justice in Estonia. Welcome, all of you. Very, very nice to see you on the other side of the screen. Without further ado, I would like to delve into the subject, and we'll go directly to you, Natalia. Hello, thank you for being here. Natalia, in your work at the HEUNI, you aim to strengthen the criminal justice response, including identification of human trafficking and other related crimes. And you engage in frank discussions about these issues. State authorities, practitioners, also researchers. I would like to ask you a question. What the role media has and whether you involve media in these discussions. Could you please share your experiences?
Thank you, Vineta, and thanks so much for the invite. Yes, media absolutely plays a role in highlighting the question of trafficking, as I think the previous panel already showed. As a research organization, I think media has many roles. First of all, it can reveal cases of trafficking and exploitation through investigative journalism, as I think the previous panel discussed. But it can also then lead to the investigation of these cases. So the media can kind of raise issues to the attention of the authorities. I think media can also showcase, for instance, police investigations and why not also trials. And this means then that it shares information about cases that the general public would otherwise perhaps not know about. And then I also think media has a role in following up on cases. For instance, issues of exploitation or cases of exploitation that come to the attention of authorities. Media can then follow up what happened to these cases. Was there any result? Was there any conviction? What happened to the victims? And then I think this also leads to what Paavo, especially in the previous panel, talked about, that media can ideally also influence policies and why not politicians. And therefore media can have an impact also in securing that we get political will for the fight against trafficking. But then if I think about media as a researcher, I think media also has an important role for us. Sometimes we as researchers also seek information from media. When we at HEUNI started with our first research project on labor exploitation and trafficking for the purpose of forced labor in 2008, already some while ago, we used media as a data source because there really wasn't that much information on the topic. So we sought cases on the media, and then we contacted, for instance, police, labor inspectors, NGOs, and others who were identified in those media articles. And then if I think about us as a research organization, we also, of course, foster direct contacts with media. So we try to be very proactive and engage with media representatives. And before the pandemic, we organized, for instance, a media breakfast where we invited journalists interested in our topics, and then we showcased our projects and our work. And that then resulted in several follow-up articles, not necessarily about our work, but about the topic. So I think it also served kind of a greater purpose. We also have a network of journalists with whom we engage, who are interested in our topics. And for instance, before we launch certain research projects or outputs, we contact several journalists and sometimes also then share the research reports in an embargoed form so that we then get coverage for the article or for the output. Because we also find that just sending out, for instance, a news brief or a press release doesn't necessarily create that much interest. You actually have to engage also with media representatives. I also think that good journalism and good research support each other. I think, for instance, the work that Paavo Teittinen has done in Finland, and HEUNI being located in Finland, we work very much, of course, in the Finnish context. Some of the issues that he has very well and excellently highlighted in his articles, we have already also showed in our research. But then from a research perspective, media often has a much greater spread than our research. So in that sense, I think research and media can support each other to create information on this cause. But then, however, perhaps one of the kind of downsides of this is that our topics seem to be of deeper interest to a handful of journalists or dedicated journalists who are kind of interested in the topic, who understand the issue, and then who are not really that much looking for sensationalist scoops, but are rather interested in doing more in-depth journalism. And then one specific peculiarity, I think, for the Finnish context is that our topic of trafficking and exploitation seems to be of interest, especially for the Swedish-speaking media in Finland. So usually our research gets quite good coverage in the Swedish language media. And this might have to do with the fact that there's a kind of perhaps a greater interest in, I don't know, human rights issues, perhaps, in Swedish-speaking media. And then it also, of course, might be related to the fact that I personally speak Swedish, so I'm quite often interviewed in Swedish-speaking media. And then I think there's also, if there's a big case of exploitation, for instance, that comes to the attention of the media, there's usually a rush to the issue by a larger group of journalists. And then as researchers, we need to then remember to explain the topic in detail to avoid kind of false portrayals of trafficking. Which then kind of leads me to my final point here in this introduction, that trafficking is, of course, quite a sexy topic for media. And this means that we as researchers need to avoid stereotypical images about victims and also about their motives and reasons why they end up in situations of exploitation. And then what we see, and which was already mentioned in the previous panel, is that visualizations and illustrations in media articles often portray quite sensationalist and stereotypical images. And that's something that we try to be very careful about as researchers, that we try to kind of influence also these images so that the picture of trafficking would not be so stereotypical and so sensationalist, but rather portray the fact that trafficking can take place everywhere or anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. It's very interesting to hear that there are many different ways how researchers or other institutions can actually engage media and work hand hand in hand with them. I'll have more questions to you later, but I would like to continue this discussion with you, Jakob, now. You work at the NGO Child 10, and your work is focused on ending child trafficking and sexual exploitation against children. When we talk about media, often there is disconnect between non-governmental organizations and media. While victims, of course, tell compelling stories, NGOs assisting victims often are reluctant to give journalists access to victims for obvious reasons, of course. I would like to hear your take on this, whether media, journalists and NGOs can have trustworthy relations and work together without compromising media independence and jeopardizing integrity of organizations, protecting and assisting victims, and also dignity of survivors of human trafficking. What's your opinion on that?
Thank you so much for this, and thank you CBSS and Södertörn University for organizing this fundamental discussion. Most NGOs disregarding of what services they provide are driven by the vision to finally put an end to trafficking. And this vision is only possible through strong partnerships with the media. It's not a question of if we can work together, only of how this can be done with integrity in a knowledge-based and survivor-sensitive collaboration. If we first address the question you raised about media independency and NGO integrity, it is a dialectic relationship, I would say. The NGO needs the media in order to create systemic impact, and media is fundamental for an NGO to cover the gaps through awareness and through political pressure. The media surely needs the civil society to receive first-hand and grassroots experience, as well as transparent criticism of the state responsibility. Our experience at Child 10 is that both parties need to compromise in creating the story, and that journalists in general are well aware about the preconditions and the fact that general testimonies about trafficking patterns, offender behavior, and victim experiences also makes a good article. But of course, there are tensions, and as you mentioned, this is often around survivor interviews, I would say. And these testimonies are fundamental, but first we have to acknowledge the role of the survivor in creating impact. As Child 10, we are very careful with this, also since we are working with children or youth who have been victims as a child. And my main message in these cases is that survivors must never be reduced to being just the story of a victim. This is in most cases often a re-exploitation of the individual and objectifies the person. And we have to acknowledge that survivors are experts not only on their own life experience, but on the patterns and methods of traffickers, and that they are a crucial part of creating not only policies and programs, but the whole narrative around trafficking. And this is a responsible way to focus not on the actual exploitation, but instead on the patterns and methods of the perpetrators and the survivors' experiences of the protection system. We have a good example of this, I would say, in the Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter, where one of our project manager, a survivor, was interviewed a few weeks ago, that has a very good balance between acknowledging the fact that she is a survivor without digging into the trauma, but instead focus on her experience and her knowledge as an expert on the patterns of exploitation. And for us working with children, it is particularly challenging with survivor experience, since the rapid shift in methods by traffickers demands up-to-date stories relevant for the public. This means that children who can testify on current modus operandi by traffickers have had a limited time to recover from their trauma, and the interview is at a greater risk of being re-traumatizing. But it can also be recovering to participate in interviews, but not when we tend to interview survivors for pityness, and then we interview academics or persons in powerful positions or NGO leaders as the experts, because this power balance in the discourse is fueling the re-exploitation of victims. And unfortunately, our experience is that the majority of youth victims of child exploitation have regretted their participation in media after publishing. What we do is that we have identified journalists that we can trust and that we know have a sensitive and knowledge-based approach. It takes time, but I would say that relationship matters. This also means that we have a common child rights-based language. I would also say that the more articles you do together, the more narrow you can get, since most online newspaper tends to contextualize an article with previous older ones to help the reader dig deeper into the subject. And this is important to avoid simplification and sensationalization, but also allows you to be quite narrow. In most cases, our experience is that media and the civil society have a joint mission with the publication. And when we do morning shows and so on, we always have a pre-discussion with the TV journalists to create content together based on what they feel that their viewers are interested in and what we can talk about. And I must say that I have never felt pushed to talk about things that doesn't feel right for us as an NGO. And also, as mentioned earlier, I would say that respecting the embargo is a fundamental part of building this trust. What I found missing and have seen increasing in the last years is that many journalists don't have time to actually do enough research. And press releases and reports are often taken word by word, and most articles are basically a copy-paste of what we as NGO have provided for information. This is, of course, a consequence of the tighter schedule of journalists, but in many ways it puts the responsibility of the quality of the information on the NGO, and it challenges the critical aspect of good journalism. So when you are a journalist and you want to write something about something sensitive as trafficking, you need to make sure that you don't rush it and that you have sufficient time to do critical research.
Thank you. Thank you, Jakob, very much. And thank you for highlighting that survivors of human trafficking, they are not a story, but they are experts in anti-trafficking issues. And this leads me to my next question to Tatiana. Tatiana, ODR just recently launched the Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Board, consisting of 21 leading survivors around the world. And lately we have had generally, globally, a discussion, should we engage survivors or should not engage in anti-trafficking work? And I would like to hear your opinion about survivors of human trafficking speaking out to media. What are the benefits and what are the risks, and what can we do to mitigate these risks?
Thank you so much, Vanetta. I would like to start iterating what you just said, with what Jakob said before, that survivors are more than their stories. They're a combination of lived experience as well as professional skills, and this is what you find in the 21 members of International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council. They come from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different experiences, and they're all individual. They've all made a decision to be survivor leaders, and this is where they are in their journey. And they're survivor leaders, but they're also professionals in so many different disciplines where they contribute regularly to policy, law work, etc. We've had, a number of survivors just recently at the UN General Assembly speaking as well. So they've taken the world by storm. But when it comes to specifically the media, the first starting point is informed consent. So many survivors actually do not experience the process of informed consent or limitations, and many also have a difficulty saying no because of their previous experience, which also leads to journalists having to learn trauma-informed approach when dealing with survivors of trafficking. That's a very, very important point when it comes to communication, body language, how they relate to the survivor in the interview process. And another important point is also the use of terminology. The use of terminology is very important to survivors as they're being interviewed. For example, a lot of times they'll be called a victim, and many actually do not want to stay in the state of victimhood permanently. So they would like to be addressed as survivor. Others who have been trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation will be told that they participated in sex work. To many, this denies their true experience of being raped 20 to 30 times a day because somebody's calling it as work. It also normalizes what happens to them because whether they're paid or not for this, they were still exploited and abused. So for many, this is very upsetting, and I've seen many survivors come back and say, why is my trafficking and exploitation now being called work? Also, the same relates to issues children, for example, where a child who has been trafficked for sexual exploitation will be called a child prostitute, which denotes consent, or child sexual abuse materials will be called child pornography. What we need to do, and this is where media plays a very critical role, and many survivors insist on it, and this is why they're upset afterwards after many interviews, because of the terminology and the language that is used, which actually creates a different perception of what it is that happened to them. And then the other point that has been mentioned actually quite a bit is the stereotypes that are used. Because the reality of trafficking, especially as it has evolved, is that there's a lot of abuse of power or position of vulnerability. And the vulnerability piece is not really coming through because a lot of times it's, unless you're tied to a radiator with chains or whatever else, then you're not really a victim. There are a lot of questions also, well, couldn't you leave? Et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of, turning it around on the survivor, him or herself as well. There are also stereotypes of what a survivor actually should be, how they should behave, why they were vulnerable. They need to come from a particular situation, but they all vary. And that is the truth. We've had, Shandov Overruntu, who is the chair of the ODIHR. Istak actually came from an educated background, and it was a number of different circumstances that ended up with her being in a brothel in the States. Others, as I said, we've had also journalists trafficked for labor exploitation as well, et cetera, et cetera. So we cannot create this perception that a survivor of trafficking looks a particular way. A survivor of trafficking could look like any one of us. And this is part of that. And part of that story is also the social inclusion story. So we all focus on what happened to them, but we do not focus on the victory, on the hope, on the dreams that could actually come out of those things too. So on the positive aspects of their story. So that equation also has to be changed.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, for pointing out the survivor's perspective and reminding to us that the words we use, terminology we use is extremely important, because for regular person, these are just words, but for survivors of human trafficking, it's the painful reality they had to live through. And now from survivors' perspective, I would like to move on to policymakers' perspective. Hello, Anu. I would like to ask you about the role of policymakers in engage media and journalists in anti-trafficking issues, because it has been mentioned several times also just now by Natalia that media of course play a very important role in generating political will, and the politicians and also society at large, we need to hear, to see the full trafficking picture, and this is where media comes in. But it is of course a two-way street. We cannot just expect media to report about these issues. I would like to know what you think the policymakers could do or should do in order to increase this and generate engagement, better engagement of media, that not only few dedicated journalists who report about these issues?
Thank you, Vineta. I think the policymakers themselves and also the public authorities, they should be present in media. And I think that's a things what they do, not so much. Because usually policymakers and public authorities, they are the ones who are coordinating the field, and actually they are the ones who know the best what's going on, what are the statistics, who are the victims, because they are collecting the information and they are also working with the information to work out the policy fields. But in this way, they also know the leakages and also the strengths and opportunities of the systems. And they know how hard it might be to work out the systems to support victims, for example. But in this perspective, they also at the same time somehow are afraid that if they go to media, then the theme itself is not widely spoken, or they think that it's not so relevant. For example, in Estonia, if we compare the statistical numbers of trafficking and domestic violence, then the numbers differ in hundreds, even in thousands. And sometimes the public officials themselves consider that they work with the field, but they themselves don't have so much to say because it's somehow evident what's going on. But they don't consider that this kind of the evidence, this is not seen from the public side and also from the media side. And I think in one way or another, we have the plans, we have the national strategies and the developmental plans, but communication plan itself is not kind of a definite part of these plans. Or if they are, then they are not followed as they are written down. So this is also one of the things to be addressed and to be changed. And in a way, we say that trafficking itself, it's one of the fields which is so robust and always gets attention. But the attention it does, this means that all of the ones who are giving the input and giving comments, that they have to be neutral, that they have to be taking under the consideration always that how they treat the persons who are related to the trafficking cases, how they affect them in the later stages, and to take this into account, then sometimes it feels like that it's easier not to talk about it because there are so many ways to get wrong. And sometimes you see that if you are spreading some information, for example, through social media, then it might address these target groups, which were not the essential target group of the team or the example itself. For example, we made online training courses for youngsters, for the 7 to 9 graders at school. But in the end, this information material was useful for the labor market and for foreign workers who work in Estonia. And in this purpose that it was in Russian language. So the language itself, it might be the issue as well for the public authorities, why they are not so much expressed in the media, because they are considering that they don't know how to talk about the issues. For example, in Estonia, we have the issue, as Natalia said, that normally in Finland, or mostly in Finland, it's in the media of Swedish language. In Estonia, there has been more interest from the Russian-speaking media platforms for the team itself, for team of trafficking, but there are not so many public officials who are able to speak with the journalists in the Russian language, so that it would be easily understandable and also clear that where they stand and what they would like to say. So I would say that policymakers and public authorities haven't used the media itself as an opportunity, not as 100%. They have used it less than it has the opportunities to offer.
Thank you, Anu, for a very kind of open and very clear judgment that it's not blaming like that others don't do something right, but it's also our joint effort and our joint responsibility. And maybe we as policymakers, as experts, are not always utilizing media and giving them tools and information that they need to report on this crime. Thank you for highlighting this. And now back to you, Natalia. In the research we carried out in Finland, it showed that human trafficking in Finland is commonly framed as an issue of criminal justice and immigration issue. But human trafficking, of course, is much more than that. And in your professional experience, what are the other issues which deserve more attention in media?
Thanks, Vineta. I think one of the reasons why this framing has been so common in Finland is that, especially if you think about labor exploitation and labor trafficking, we've had quite a number of convictions, and all the victims have been migrant workers. And also there are historical reasons why there's been a strong focus on immigration. However, I think this has led to quite an uneven distribution of different forms of exploitation in Finnish media. So there has been a tendency in recent years to focus more on labor exploitation at the expense perhaps of other forms of exploitation. So I think in my personal opinion, I think there needs to be more focus, for instance, on sexual exploitation and also other forms of exploitation. I think there needs to be more focus on children as victims, on forced marriage and its linkages to trafficking. And I think also a kind of a forgotten issue in recent years has been the issue of demand reduction as a form of prevention. And now I mean demand reduction in a kind of a broad sense. If we look at this children as victims of trafficking, we actually a few years ago launched a report at HEUNI on children as victims of trafficking in Finland. And there was indeed a good number of articles on children as victims, including Finnish children who have run away from institutions and then in a vulnerable position ending up in situations of sexual exploitation or exploitation in criminal activity. And I think the media, especially in this case, has a really important role to play in kind of broadening the understanding that this could also be trafficking and also showing that it's not just related to migration, for instance. I also think, as I already said, that we really need to talk about sexual exploitation, which has in Finland, compared to perhaps the other Nordic countries, received less attention, both by practitioners and in media. And then I think this issue of exploitation in criminal activity and the link then to a person who's a victim also perhaps being a perpetrator and the kind of huge complexities that this entails. I think that's something that would also be important to highlight in media. And there's some research ongoing on this topic in Finland, so I'm hoping that this will be an issue that will be raised next year also by media. And then I think one really important aspect is the kind of structural issues that enable exploitation. So why is it that exploitation exists? Why is it that trafficking exists? So to kind of focus on the elements in our society which in a way facilitate exploitation. And as a very kind of a specific example, I want to talk a bit about public procurement. We are now very much at HEUNI working with public procurement on how we through that function could prevent exploitation and trafficking. And incidentally, last week we launched a new guide for public procurement officials on how to prevent exploitation in national public procurement. So that is not in global supply chains, but in national supply chains, for instance, in restaurant, cleaning, construction, transport. And I think this is a really important issue for media as well, because public procurement agencies use public funds. So it's important that those funds are used in a sustainable way. And also to highlight the fact that I think it was Jakob who talked about that exploitation can be really nearby. It could be as simple as who cleans the local schools. Are you sure that the procurement process there is transparent and sustainable and that there's no exploitation? And we actually had cases like this in Finland, and one of these cases was also raised by media with quite a lot of attention to the issue. I think this was already raised, but I want to talk a bit about the fact that the challenge, I think, for media articles is that in order for them to be, in a way, touching or attractive, there's often the need to have a story, some kind of a person behind the narrative. And as already was mentioned by the other speakers, I think it's very difficult because victims understandably might not be ready to come forward in media. It might not be in their interest. It might actually be very disadvantageous for them. So I think the ethics of involving victims or survivors in media articles is something that we need perhaps some more consideration to. And it applies also to research. I think it's the same for us as researchers. Like, when do we approach victims and survivors, and how do we do that, and how do we make sure that their voices are heard in the best possible way? But I think one aspect which was actually mentioned already in the previous panel is that there might be need for more structural cooperation between media actors and NGOs and service providers, and why not researchers and also practitioners, as Anu mentioned, to have perhaps have some kind of joint media strategies. How to talk about the issue of trafficking without placing victims and survivors in a difficult situation. And here I think prepared and well-structured investigative journalism has a really important role to play in interviewing victims and survivors in a non-sensationalist way. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia, for describing the complexity of this crime. And of course, there are more ways how we can present the issue without placing a victim in the spotlight, like the public procurement, what you just mentioned. It's not really kind of angle journalists have really picked up, but it's another way how to talk about these issues, maybe without interviewing directly victims. So it's a work for us, practitioners and experts as well, to educate journalists and to show them that there are different forms of trafficking and different angles, how they can show the full picture, because this is a good journalism. And then to continue with, thank you, Natalia, and now to continue with good journalism. Jakob, I have another question for you. Good journalism, of course, means raising awareness about human trafficking through images, through words that empower survivors rather than simplify the issue or re-traumatize survivors. I would like to hear your thoughts, Jakob, on the use of terminology and images when reporting cases on human trafficking in Sweden. How would you describe this?
Thank you. I mean, when we talk about terminology, it is of course very contextual. I mean, in Sweden we have a clear standpoint that all forms of prostitution is sexual exploitation and a form of men's violence against women. And this is our clear standing point as an organization as well. And in that way, prostitution as a terminology can't be seen as neutral. And I appreciate that there has been a shift in talking more and more about exploitation in prostitution using that kind of terminology. With that in mind, I also want to emphasize what Tatiana mentioned earlier about to never talk about children in prostitution in any context, since a child is always a victim of a sexual crime and abuse and an exploitation. This narrative is fundamental in reporting about child exploitation. I would also like to address the fact that when there are articles or reportages about children, journalists tend to seek answers of the root causes of the exploitation in the child. And this is also about agency. We tend to put the blame of the exploitation on the actual child by searching for answers. We're looking for terminology like selling sex as a self-harm, as trying to find other circumstances, drug abuse, family relations, answers in the child's life to explain why he or she ended up in exploitation. And I mean, this is something that we really need to change, because disregarding of the situation of the child, there is always a man there ready to exploit the vulnerability of the child and to lure the child. And this is where the responsibility should be placed in the article, and where the agency is when you portray different kinds of child exploitation. We have also previously talked about the terminology around sex work and the glorification around commercial sexual exploitation. And in this context, I would also like to address the fact that it's not only about when journalists are writing their own articles, it's also about when you are translating articles from other news media into your own language, reproducing in your own article. For example, we can take this widespread article about this Austrian brothel that provided COVID vaccines for free. If you got the opportunity to exploit a woman if you took a COVID vaccine shot, for example. And this was also very reproduced in Sweden without any critical aspect about the exploitation of women in prostitution. And it's very important that you contextualize these kind of articles when you're reproducing them, that other journalists, and I can see that also this has to do, I think, with the tight time frames, but you can't just translate an article and reproduce it in a different context. Because in general, I mean, we have very powerful stakeholders aiming to glorify and normalize commercial sexual exploitation. Stakeholders that creates narrative based on new terminologies. In cases of children, we have seen an increase of so-called sugar dating, where rich men pays young girls for acting as sugar babes for a date. And this is contextualized with glorified messages on easy and fast money without any requirements of the sugar babe, even though we know it's obvious that a 50-year-old man doesn't pay 400 euro to a 70-year-old girl to have someone to talk about his dinner plans with for the next weekend. And we need to resist this glorified narrative. Trafficking is fueled by all forms of prostitution and commercial sexual exploitation. And this is fueled by our view on the role of the exploited. And there is no other agenda that traffickers benefit from more than the agenda that these women and children are consenting or have chosen this or are themselves agents of the abuse or enjoying the abuse. And in this agenda, words really matter a lot. And to brand commercial sexual exploitation with so-called sex work or something neutral that two independent actors have agreed on is what makes trafficking possible. And perpetrators, as the buyers, pay for the concept of an imaginary experience of a happy and voluntarily body to consume and exploit. And by spreading this narrative, media plays in the hands of traffickers.
Thank you, Jakob. It's, of course, absolutely unbelievable that we are talking about glorifying child exploitation or child trafficking. But of course, unfortunately, there are not only good examples in media, but also not so good examples. Thank you, Jakob. You, like Anu and Natalia, you mentioned in your interventions that, for example, Swedish media is more active in reporting about human trafficking, or like in Estonia, it's Russian media who is more active. Tatiana, you have worked around the world with human trafficking issues, literally in different continents. I would like to ask you, did you see like some significant differences among countries, how media work? And can you share maybe some positive examples, encouraging examples of focused media campaigns, or maybe you have also experienced not so successful or positive examples you would like to share with us?
Thank you, Vineta. I have actually learned a lot of my work working with investigative journalists around the globe. And in Ghana, for example, in my very early days, and many years ago, I teamed up with an investigative journalist by the name of Anas Anas, and we were able to actually, back in those days, so we're talking about 15 years ago, to do precedent-setting cases which actually had significant impact on legislation, but also demonstrated issues of corruption and also resulted in actually convictions. So this is where media has a significant role to play in checking and making sure that there's justice for victims and survivors of trafficking, and especially in countries where there are higher levels of corruption or where these cases are not a priority. So this is where I've seen media make these cases a priority. I've seen them push and push and push, especially when it comes to children, and with oftentimes good result. As I said, I've seen legislation changes in many countries, and I've seen a response and then international pressure also on the country because of investigative media stories that have been done. And one of the things that I wanted to mention before I go to good examples, but because this is also part of it, is a change in focus. So when it comes to media, there needs to be a change in focus from the stories of victims and survivors, but to focus on demand. Who are the buyers? What Jakob said, this is the issue here. We focus on the victims, what has happened, but we are not focusing on who's doing it. Because for many survivors and victims that I've spoken to, they always say, yes, maybe the trafficker is punished, but those that have come and abused me on a daily basis over and over and over again, they're nowhere in any of the stories. These are, people that are around us, the perpetrators, who have bought and abused my body, or those that are buying goods produced by my labor exploitation. So where are those people? So this is where I think, good media will turn the story around and look at who is creating the demand for trafficking and how we could create that social change and no longer allow them to pretend that this has been work or that they have no culpability within those issues. Some of the good examples actually that I have seen were, for example, CNN Freedom Project. They have done quite a few really in-depth stories, and they take their time in doing the investigations in real terms, all across the world, looking at different types of situations of trafficking. And I've seen a lot of the trauma-informed approach actually in their stories as well. So to me, that's one piece that has created, or one program that has created consistent knowledge and understanding of the issue of trafficking for now many years, actually. Another one I have seen, which is coming from a survivor leaders, for example, the Red Chair campaign, actually done by Candela Limo, who is part of ESTOC, where she's looking actually to have a seat created at universities for survivors of trafficking. So looking future-wise. So once again, not just sticking to what has happened, how many times has someone been raped? Because I've seen these stories, with a picture of a survivor, where she can then be, or he can be stigmatized for the rest of their life, saying this person has been raped 20-something thousand times by, in this way. It's not actually helpful. The fact that, bad things have happened, they've happened. And it's important to say that they have happened. But we also need stories of hope. So the stories that I've seen are stories of justice, the stories of hope, because they send a very strong message to society, but also to traffickers.
Thank you, Tatiana, very much. And it's really encouraging to hear that we actually, all the speakers of today's conference had many good stories and experience to share rather than some bad examples how media reported on human trafficking. So that's really encouraging. Thank you, Tatiana, very much. Anu, you and the Ministry of Justice is a partner in our THALIA project. In this project and also in other projects, you actively work with young people, with children and young people. While we all know very well why it's important to talk with young people about human trafficking, to inform them about the risks that they do not fall into the traps, but I would like to hear what young people and this work with children and young people give to you as a policy maker, because they of course have a lot to contribute to anti-trafficking work. So how do young people contribute to anti-trafficking work in Estonia and to your work as a policy maker?
Regards juveniles and youngsters, I think the engagement of them is itself essential. And maybe sometimes we forget that. We kind of work out the messages for them. We make the kind of the information given to them so that they would learn it. But they have to be part of the process. Otherwise, they don't learn, and they have to be kind of the active learners. In this way, they actually react and proact later. And one of the things about the youngsters, what we have learned in working with them is that you have to touch the influencers, because if we take off the different ages of youngsters, then at some point of they have the parents who are the most for them, and where they would get all the essential knowledge. Then they have school and teachers, and these are the role models for them. But at some point of time of the age, if they are teenagers, then they have the other teenagers whom they are listening and who are the role models for them. And you have to find the ones who are responsible and who are able to give the information what you consider is essential for the youngsters. So in this respect, training of the trainers who work with youngsters and the youngsters on the same age level, this is one of the core things to consider always if you work with them. And for example, we try to do with the National Social Insurance Board the trainings for youngsters, and also for the ones who work with youngsters, for example, youth workers. And in all of these trainings, at least part of the training is the engagement of youngsters and listening to the kind of their side of the story. To understand that whether all of the issues what we see are relevant in Estonia are actually relevant to them. And from the feedback of the youngsters, we have made a couple of the public surveys where it has been asked from the 10 to 12 graders that how they consider is trafficking relevant for them and whether they see that trafficking is actually taking place in Estonia. And it's not like rare times we see the answer that they actually don't see that it does affect them. They understand that trafficking itself, it is here, but they more consider it to be the international theme than our own Estonian matter to solve or to learn some information about it, so that to protect themselves and also to protect the other youngsters. And normally they don't know where to turn for asking help. So in this respect, we have all of the social services out there, but we haven't found yet the right channel to address the issues to youngsters. So this is what we have to do more and more. And we have some plans also for that in the future, to train the trainers who train youngsters and also to go to the schools. And of course, you have to be there where the youngsters are. So if they are in social media, then you, with your messages, you have to be there as well. But taking the project of THALIA, what we learned from this one is that actually trainings offered to media students, this has been entirely new platform for us. We reached a couple of universities who actually train future journalists. We have these courses in Tartu University and in Tallinn University. So we started to cooperate with Tallinn University, and firstly we actually found a group of youngsters who are learning in different levels. They are doing either the master's degree or the bachelor degree, and they are from anthropology to law, learning these professions, and they actually made prevention materials for the youngsters and also for teachers, and they had the result of a couple of podcasts, for example, and the articles, and they themselves learned throughout the process that they didn't know everything about different trafficking fields, for example. This was one of the things of the feedback given from them. And what we saw, that there was a huge interest for the theme of labor exploitation. So we made a special seminar, for example, for the media students in Tallinn University about labor exploitation situation at the moment in Estonia. What are the suspicious cases, for example, getting up to the investigations? What are the cases where the assistance is offered from the Social Insurance Board? And this kind of opened a new platform for them, and that they so far consider that if we have anything, then we have sexual exploitation, but that we have so many foreign workers who are in the conditions in Estonia where you can say that there are some of the doubts about exploitative measures against them, and also that there might be bigger cases coming at some point of time. At the moment, there's no concrete investigations of those. But the purpose of engaging, I would say, that media students and the future journalists and youngsters in general is that the purpose of all of the preventive activities and giving the information to them about the threats of trafficking and of the assistance possibilities is that they would have a better skills, better social skills for their future lives, and so that all of the choices they make in the future would be the choices made knowingly, that they actually know and they know what to choose and what not to choose.
Thank you, Anna. I really liked how you pointed out that we should stop treating children, young people as victims or potential victims, but rather start seeing them as active listeners and as partners. Because as one young boy in Denmark said to us once, we have a head and two hands, use us. So if we find the right channels, how to reach young people, how to spread the knowledge and the message, they will respond. And we don't want them to tell them what to do and what not to do, but we want them to think critically. And when they are in a situation, a risky situation, they can think for themselves what they should or should not do. And thank you very much for your active work in Estonia, and good luck with that in the future. I wish I could ask you more questions, but we unfortunately are running out of time, and I want to give a possibility to our participant audience to ask you some questions as well. And I see that we have several questions here. Okay, the first question is, what angles of human trafficking do you feel are still left out in the media's shed light? Who would like to answer this question? Are there any angles you feel are not covered at all or should be covered more? Jakob, please.
I just want to take the opportunity to really emphasize what was mentioned earlier about the client, the perpetrators, and reducing the demand. That we have this dialectic perception of trafficking, where we have the stereotype victim and we have the trafficker who are running the exploitation, and we tend to always forget about the focus on the people who are actually making this trafficking possible, the one who are using the services of the exploited. And I think that is a fundamental part for media in the future, to take part in reducing the demand. And we had a a good example of this in Sweden that I can mention. I think in a local newspaper there was a podcast called Sisters, where the journalist followed 3 girls victim of commercial sexual exploitation and walked them through the city. And it was quite a long podcast. It was several hours. They really had a time to tell the story in the way that they wanted to, and it was done very respectfully. And in combination, when releasing this podcast, the newspaper also released an analysis and an investigation of 400 men who had paid for sexual abuse in that area, and to not forget the ones who are actually fueling the trafficking by paying for the exploitation, I would say is a critical aspect in future reporting.
Thank you, Jakob. Does anybody else would like to add to this? Ano, please.
What I can add is that maybe it's not yet so much covered is online recruitment. And also if we talk about youngsters, then forcing them to do criminal activities. And this, I'm just taking this as an example from Estonian media, that we have a number of cases written about sexual exploitation. Some of the cases about labor exploitation, but not so many of engaging youngsters. And these might not be the cases of trafficking at the first instance, but these are the processes where adults start to influence youngsters with different kind of good things, offering them support, offering them raising their self-esteem, giving them credits for their appearance, for example. But all of these are in the intention to engage them more and more into the process of trafficking, which might lead to that. So these are the things we should talk about more. And I'm actually entirely agree with Jacob, saying that we have to talk about more of the ways why we have trafficking. Who are the ones who are buying sex, for example? Who are the employers who actually exploit people? Why they do that? How widely spread it is. So we have to also not always put under the lights the victims, but also the ones who are organizing the schemes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tatiana, you also wanted to add something.
I will just reconfirm the fact that we need to really focus on demand. That's the actual story that hasn't been told yet. Who are these people? You know, we have focused on how many times someone has gotten abused and such, etc., etc. But the other part is trafficking for the purpose of pornography production and child sexual abuse material production. We have seen a growth of this during the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of things have turned online, and that's something that no one has really looked into. So we know child sexual abuse materials are being produced. We know children are being groomed the minute they get online. We know adults are now being exploited online as well. So without actual contact with the demand or the consumers. So one of the things that we need to do is really explore that piece, because the dynamics of trafficking are changing, and a lot of it is going online, or the different elements of the crime or different parts of the exploitation. So that's the story. And what I would say to all journalists, especially investigative journalists, there's so many stories to be told. Exceptional, interesting, impactful stories. And it's just about looking at things through a different lens and seeing things from the perspective of survivors, because they have those stories, because they see things in a way that none of us actually see, because they've been there.
Thank you, Tatiana. And I hope very much that the students of journalism who are listening to us now, they are listening carefully, and they will take it on with them, and hopefully will write about the demand side of this issue as well. Natalia, please.
Thank you. I think from the Finnish perspective, one topic which would merit more discussion is the question of forced marriage, as I mentioned, and also the linkages then to minors, not just adults. and the kind of complexities of different forms of forced marriage. But I also agree with the others, as I also mentioned before, that I think demand reduction is really important. And I think in addition to, of course, sexual exploitation and demand reduction there, I think a big kind of a challenge is how to, in a way, educate consumers. Because it often then becomes an issue that you as a consumer have the responsibility, even though the question is inherently structural. That it's difficult for consumers to alone bear the responsibility. But I think, for instance, when it comes to cleaning services or construction and others, it would be possible to kind of try to highlight these complexities and what you as an individual could do to prevent your participation in exploitation, taking into account that the supply chains are really complex also at a national level. So I think this is something which I think would be very interesting and important for journalists to kind of dwell into. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Often articles in Sweden reporting on labor inspections at work sites never ask follow-up questions like what happened to the identified workers, were they deported, did they receive any assistance? So how do we increase the awareness on issues such as presumed victims being deported without assistance? As the question is about Sweden, I am looking at Natalia and Jakob, but maybe Natalia, please.
Thank you. I think this is very complex in Sweden, where I think there has been not that much focus on the victims and the survivors in labor exploitation, but rather it's been framed more as a question of social dumping and perhaps work without legitimate permits. I think the question there is that journalists should actually ask those follow-up questions. They should ask those questions. What happens to those workers? Why are they mostly automatically deported? Why are there no investigations or very few investigations? I think these follow-up questions are really important. And also in the Swedish context, I think one of the big challenges is that the working conditions of migrant workers in a way fall between the cracks. The monitoring of them, I mean. So I think it's a structural question that requires, I think, journalists together with practitioners and researchers looking into why is it that so few cases proceed to investigation and then to rights and justice for the victims.
Thank you. Would anybody else would like to add? Tatiana, please.
What I would actually also say is that it's important for journalists to really understand the laws that are in place and the policies that are in place. For example, is there a national referral mechanism? Is the recovery and the reflection period provided, or the proper identification procedures carried out? And who's responsible for those? Because once there's that understanding, then it is much easier to ensure that there is transparency and accountability for non-identification of presumed victims of trafficking. So that part is really, really important to understand all of the pieces that need to be there for the identification and who is responsible for what. And just as a last piece is that national referral mechanisms are important. We have done studies now all across, and countries that do have national referral mechanisms actually do significantly better at identification and assistance and protection of victims of trafficking.
Thank you, Tatiana. I absolutely agree with you. The issue is much bigger than just following up, because only very few, of course, survivors end up formally identified and receive assistance. And this is where we need to think about national referral mechanism, about the general assistance system, and then many other aspects which we still are not so great at. Jakob, you also wanted to add something.
Yeah, thank you. Mostly just emphasize what Tatiana and Natalia just said. I mean, in these cases, we have had some raids in Sweden with labor exploitation, but we also have rates in terms of commercial sex exploitation and prostitution. And I think it's really important that the journalists are well aware about the legislation and the legislative framework and our national referral mechanism to also ask the questions to the investigators, to the police, to the ones who are participating in the investigation, and ask the question, why are you not investigating this as trafficking? And why are you, and try to get to put the pressure also, because we have a widespread problem, I would say, to avoid reporting trafficking cases in Sweden, both in labor exploitation and in commercial sexual exploitation within our authorities. And it is of utmost importance that journalists don't only accept the modus operandi of the police, for example, or the labor investigator, but instead are putting them against the wall and ask why these cases are not investigated, because that is a huge problem, I would say, in Sweden when it comes to victim identification.
Thank you, Jakob. And I would like to thank all of you, my dear panelists. I have enjoyed this conversation with you very much. And I think we can conclude that, like Tatiana just mentioned, that this is like a puzzle. We all need each other. We all need to work in partnership to complement each other's work. And without these joint efforts, we cannot really succeed. And it was very interesting to hear about so many different ways how to engage media, how to utilize media in this work, and also how to balance between telling survivors' story, giving them voice, and also not re-traumatizing and victimizing people who already went through so much. Thank you again for your inputs, for being here with us. With that, we are concluding the second panel of today, and we all deserve lunch. We will be back at 2 sharp. Please do not be late, because it's going to be a very exciting panel. We will have here on the screen with us 3 winning students who were the best among the student contributions about human trafficking issues. And we also will have teachers from universities to share their perspectives. Thank you, and see you back here at 2 o'clock.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch. We'll now continue the conference. My name is Madeleine Sundell, and I'm a human rights lawyer. In order to combat human trafficking on a global level, we need the whole society and all actors on board to participate. There's a huge need for a multidisciplinary approach and efficient communication to highlight and prioritize this global social injustice to reach more target groups. The importance of compassionate storytelling is one of the important elements to step up the fight, to make the general public aware. Involve more politicians and agencies to step up their commitment to understand the vast seriousity in this crime and its human rights violations. During this coming hour, I have the privilege to moderate a panel on the role of the academia in human trafficking. We'll be able to gain perspectives from teachers and students from universities in Europe who have participated in the THALIA project. Within the framework of the THALIA project, the CBSS and Södertörn University launched a call for contributions for students where journalistic students were encouraged to enter a competition by submitting journalistic pieces on the topic of human trafficking, such as articles, podcasts, radio segments, or films. With us today, we have 3 students with the winning journalistic pieces on the competition. Great seeing you all. Anastasia Daniluk, Raivo Nodapera, and Urte Vajavodskaite. It's a true honor having you with us today. We also have 2 teachers from the participating universities, Urban Larsen and Aukse Balchitien. Welcome to you as well. I'm going to start with the students and with you, Anastasia. Student at Lesia Ukrainka-Volyn National University in Ukraine. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks.
It's an honor having you with us today, and you are also accompanied by an interpreter, Natalia Kasyanchuk. Welcome to you as well.
Welcome. Thanks.
So, starting with my first questions. Anastasia, how did you get the idea to your journalistic piece?
The idea to write essay in the form of an interview came up quite spontaneously. In Ukraine, I have participated in online training about coverage of human trafficking in the media for 4 days. My husband Stanislav joined with me. He recalled the story that I described in my future work. The person who I interviewed is a fellow villager of my husband, and it turns out that I'm personally acquainted with several characters from the events I have described. If I didn't hear Andrew's story, I would never have thought that these people have such a past behind them. This made me to believe that almost all of us have known such people or had life experience related to labor exploitation. However, for some reason in our country and in many countries around the world, it is not popular to voice more ever to discuss publicly. The topic of slave labor is not taken seriously, and quite often people find themselves in difficult circumstances. And they say our social say that these people they say they were used because they are stupid, inattentive and trusting. But the society that condemns them does not teach them how to avoid such situation. Victim blaming is growing. It is also a shame that the media is promoting such topic in the pursuit of sensational headlines and high-profile stories. They are responsible for contributing to people losing their lives, unknowingly cripple the culture of compassion and help for those in need. I want to believe when my work is published, everyone who reads Andrew's story will look at the problem of slave labor and human trafficking in terms of compassion, and then the question what would happen if I were in his place. As a rule, when a person puts himself or his relative in place, there condemnation, change, compassion, and pity for the victim, and the anger is usually poured on the exploiters. Also, Nastya wants to say that in addition to Andrew's story, it teaches us that you should always be careful and not to blindly trust everyone, and even those people who are now very close for many years, they are not always trustful. When money comes into play, some human qualities disappear from people, and money plays the most important role. This is all about the idea and how it appeared in Nastya's mind.
Much, and I can really hear in your storytelling, Anastasia, how you are personally committed and how you really care to raise awareness. So my next question would be, what was surprising new information for you when doing this research? What you did not know before?
As a Generation Z person, I was amazed that someone was willing to travel thousands of miles, do hard work, and go through hardships. I was amazed at the trust in people, and he requires of not leaving any address, contact, or any other contact information about their whereabouts. In addition, it is difficult for me to understand how it is possible to go another country without any guarantees and give your documents to some other people. But yes, in fact, millions of people work like that, and it is awful. And yet people do not feel protected by law and enforcement. Yeah. And they say we didn't even know then what labor exploitation was, and that we can write a statement to the police about neighbors who sold us. People
important. Thank you, Anastasia. And my last question would be, what have you learned yourself from working with this?
Working to conduct this interview, I learned to communicate carefully with victims. You need to have a dialogue with the interviewer, so he feels you desire to use his example to warn other of danger, and not just tear up to health wounds for the sake or another sensation. Because people are reluctant to share their mistakes, tragedies or failures. They are afraid of condemnation. They afraid to stupid, and in the end, they just want to forget such stories. At the beginning of the interview, Andrei told me, there's nothing to tell. It's been so long. You won't be interested in hearing about it. However, when I explained the ultimate goal for this interview, why others should know about his story and why it is important, I learned more that I expected. In addition, I realized that having cardboards or stories with loved ones very important. So that in situation where you need help, you can report it even when your every move or word is being tracked. And it is really important to carefully research the employer's place works and reviews about it before traveling thousands of miles and pursuit money.
Thank you very, very much, Anastasia. And I can really understand why your story became so successful, because you have so many learning elements from your own stories and how you were able to conduct this interview and gain so much more. I really hope that your journalistic piece will spread all over your country and elsewhere. Stay with us, please, until we have more questions maybe in the end of this session. Our next student and winning piece is Reivo Nodapera at Tallinn University from Estonia. How are you?
Hello. Thank you. It's very good to be here.
And welcome and big congratulations. You are also one of the winners. Reivo, tell us, how did you choose your format and how did you carry out your research?
Yes. So first of all, let me thank you for organizing this great event. It's really important and meaningful topic that we should all discuss. I first learned about the event via my university. So we had many different projects that we could choose between. But me and my team, we gravitated towards the human trafficking because we felt that if our project would actually help someone to educate somebody, or in a best case scenario, actually save somebody from exploitation situation, then it's definitely worthwhile. So I'm actually myself international relations student, but I have been interested in the migration crisis, especially since the 2015. And the other students were Stina Kartsep, who's a journalist student, and Kalle Aasmäe, and he studies social sciences. And we felt that we kind of have this good dynamic, so we had a little bit knowledge in every kind of field that we wanted to cover. And when we decided to format, our target audience was youngsters, the young people. We wanted to involve them more. So teenagers and people in their 20s and 30s. And we thought that the medium that we're going to use is going to be podcast, because that seems to be fairly popular these days. So, and we also wanted to cover in our podcast both the Estonian local aspect, so it's for the local people to educate them about what's going on, and also like international aspect. And so divided our podcast into 3 different parts. First part, we started with a story of an Estonian girl who has been a victim of human trafficking, and she was heavily exploited. So we found the court case. Of course, we changed the names and locations and tried to be so sensitive as we could about it. And we just narrated the story. After that, we followed the interview with Sirle Blomberg, who's head of counseling of victims of human trafficking. And she gave us an overview about the situation in Estonia. And lastly, we had an interview with Hille Hanso, and she is a freelance journalist who's based in Istanbul, and she mainly deals with immigration situations. So in the end, we mixed and mastered all of these parts together, and we created a podcast that's now linked on YouTube and our university's website.
Thank you very much, Reivo. And as you said, you are 3 students working together. So talking about a multidisciplinary approach, you really have conducted that in your research as well. And I was very intrigued myself when I was listening to this podcast that you have covered different angles and different sources and interviews. So thank you very much for this. What feedback have you received so far?
Well, our podcast is 45 minutes long. And the first feedback actually came from our families and friends before we presented to the university. And it was overwhelmingly positive. Mostly what they said is they learned a lot of new things about human trafficking and exploitation. There were a lot of categories that they would never know where to look, for example, where to find it. And the second feedback came actually from our mentors, which I would hereby like to thank our mentor, Andres Könno, who was helping us through this process. And that was also overwhelmingly positive. In the end, all of our students, we put our works together and we listened and watched each other projects. And so people were happy with it. And also great thanks to Anu Leps and Sirle Blomberg. They work in the Ministry of Justice and Social Security Agency. And these people were also happy with the results. And that meant the most for us, because these are people who in their daily life, they actually deal with these problems. So, so we also uploaded this to the TLU media website, Luna, for everyone to listen. And perhaps the biggest exposure has been so far thanks to your conference. So we will see where it goes from here.
Thank you very much, Reivo. And my last question, of course, you said now you're not a student of journalism, but international relations. But talking about future journalists and the future role of media, what do you think that you can bring to change the situation of trafficking in human beings?
Well, I think the most important part is bringing the awareness. Bringing the education about the matter, because we kind of have in some cases, we have kind of dogmatic and traditional understanding of what might human trafficking be. But as the society develops, then there are different forms of human trafficking these days that maybe weren't prevalent before. Thanks to internet, there are different ways to exploit people. So it's important to educate journalists and people who are about to cover these kind of topics. You don't have to necessarily have to be a specialist to talk about human trafficking. It's just enough if you comprehend the situation and do your best. Also, I think very important is what you are doing here, because you are involving academia and other journalists in a project-based learning. So actually myself, I learned a lot during this project. Now I can tell people stories, what human trafficking is, but mostly what Sirla Blomberg also pointed out, how to notice it. So there are many types of human trafficking cases that I would not be able to notice before that I am now. So, and also like different mediums. There are plenty of people who are willing to speak about the matter. And if people would just invite them to their podcasts, to their shows, they're all over the internet, then we could really create education and awareness about this topic.
And my last question for you, Raivo, because I know you have to leave us earlier than the others, so you will not be with us for the questions and answers. But can you please tell us what was new or striking news or an eye-opener for you when it comes to the theme of human trafficking that you will carry on in your future journey?
Well, the main thing I took out from it there, that human trafficking can actually be very subtle. Like they pointed out that mostly when we talk about human trafficking, we talk about the hard cases, and in media, it's very often accompanied with the pictures of people chained or people stuck somewhere. But actually, it can be very subtle. It can be people who come to work in a foreign country, and then they're de facto enslaved. And it's very hard to notice this kind of people who work in a construction site or they work in a kitchen in a restaurant, and yeah, so it's more subtle because sometimes it seems that the person is willingly put him or herself in the situation, but actually it's kind of a subtle human trafficking in a situation where the human has been forced or manipulated, or he or she just cannot get out of the situation.
Thank you very much, Raivo, for having the opportunity to be with us today. And I wish you the best, and the same for your fellow students. And we will let you know afterwards about the prize of you as a winning team. And I also hope that your podcast will continue to spread and that you will continue with this commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our third and final student in this panel. Welcome Urte Vajavodskaite from Vilnius University in Lithuania. Big congratulations to your piece. How are you today?
Thank you. Fine.
Urte, tell us, how did you choose your piece and focus on children in the issue of human trafficking?
Yes, first of all, I want to thank for Vilnius University teachers and all other people which helped me to create this journalist work. And speaking about my topic, how I made this choice, so firstly, I wanted to create a work which would provide some main knowledge about human trafficking. And human traffickers usually choose as victims people which have a lack of social skills and lack of experience, has a complicated financial situation, or feel difficult to infuse into normal social life. As well, possible victims may have a problematic family situation or even no family at all. So to my mind, children, adolescents, especially those who face in their lives various social problems, is a very vulnerable social group. So, and due to lack of life experience and due to lack of ability to encounter possible lie and danger, they may fall into human traffickers' traps. So trafficking in human beings is cruel crime and usually leaves long impact, suffering and insecurity feeling in victims' lives. And having such an experience in childhood time, as in any other time actually, is very psychologically difficult. And so with my journalist work, I wanted to provide some main information which would help to recognize and avoid this crime in our community.
Thank you very much, Urte. And the last statistics we know of the European Union, 25% of all victims of human trafficking are children. And as you say, they are a very targetable and vulnerable group. So thank you very much for highlighting this in your YouTube video. When doing this journalistic work, did you think or act different or in a unique way due to the theme of human trafficking?
Well, it's person who would watch my video maybe would see some other unique parts of my video. I don't know, but well, personally, firstly, all situation pushed me to search already existing written stories of human trafficking victims, and I think it was quite a unique option. To my mind, we have to understand that having a new interview with person who suffered human trafficking in adolescent time, in childhood time, or even later, is a very high responsibility, actually. This person opens his or her sensitive memories, so final journalist work has to be worth of it. So, but anyway, really not a lot of people wants to speak and even remember such a things, according to my experience, as I tried to find this person. So in my situation, a unique part was giving already published story to another person and making a voice record, I would say.
Thank you very much. And I understand it's a lot of ethical dilemmas being a journalist and interviewing a victim in any type of situation, but especially here and speaking about adolescents. So thank you very much for giving us those learning perspectives. Urte, now with the things you're telling us and in your storytelling and with this video, is there a chance you feel there will be a continuing interest from your side in this issue?
Well, at the moment, I feel open to any opportunities or to any ideas which would come to my mind, but particular accurate plans, how I will continue at the moment, I don't have.
And what did your fellow students say about your video and your winning piece so far?
I hope they like it.
I hope that many of us will have the chance to look at it. It's at CBSS webpage, and you will see all the 3 journalistic pieces there. Urte, thank you very much for now, and I hope that you will stay with us. And to the audience, you still have the possibility to ask questions to our students. But for now, we want to thank the students for gaining very relevant and very compassionate and creative, important perspectives to our discussion. And I hope if you have not had the chance to go into the CBSS website, you can find the 3 different pieces there. And to carry on an intrigue, we will announce the prizes for our winners at the end of this conference. But for now, we will move on to our teachers in the panel from Sweden and Lithuania. And I will start with you, Urban Larsen, representing Södertörn University, also partner in this project. Urban, how are you today? As a university, what role can you play in the field of combating human trafficking?
Sorry for not putting my mic there. I'm good. Thank you. And really thank you for organizing this conference. It's been really interesting so far and very nice to hear the students talk about their work. Well, I think what we have been doing in this THALIA project is an example of what universities can do. And it has to do with the three basic tasks that universities are set up to fulfill, namely to carry out research, to educate students, and to communicate our activities to the world outside the university, to a wider and non-academic audience. And it's especially the third task that can be creatively organized in order to make a difference, to have an impact on precarious topics such as trafficking. And how these parts are carried out and how they are combined depends obviously on what particular university discipline we're talking about. But if we take journalism more specifically, which is the case here, research on media and human trafficking, first of all, starts with the premise that how we as citizens come to think of trafficking in human beings is not only a question of what is actually going on in this particular field, but it's also a question of how the mass media reports on and frames the field. And now, although we've seen instances or heard instances of exemplary work from earlier panels today, research says that the way the media frames this field is often stereotypic, sensationalistic, and not so nuanced. And it is most often focusing on prostitution, on police investigations, which are merely part of the larger field that we have here. So this is what research tells us, and this feeds into our classes, to our education, which is the second task. We present the research results to our students, and we supply them with analytical tools to explain and understand why it looks like it does. And it has to do with news evaluation criteria, agenda setting, commercialization. It has to do with the logics of the mass media to narrate things in certain ways to make it comprehensible and engaging. And on the more practical side, it has to do with a degree of dependency on behalf of the journalist on certain sources, like the police and court cases, and with methodological and ethical difficulties of actually getting access to people involved in human trafficking that could tell their stories on their own conditions. And it obviously also has to do with time, which moves sort of the responsibility away from journalists and onto their managers and chief editors. Do they actually allocate enough time to carry out this kind of work? These aspects are brought up in classes, and students learn how to reflect on them in analytically relevant ways. And we also educate them to do things in a more sustainable way once they enter into the newsrooms as professionals. And the third task is communicating research to a wider audience, to the world outside. And this can take many forms. And in a simple form, you might, as an academic, write popularized pieces for mainstream newspapers, appear on television, and so on. But it could also mean teaming up and collaborating with other actors, such as civil society organizations, state authorities, or, as in our case, an organization working transnationally, such as the Council of the Baltic Sea States, CBSS, and develop projects of collaboration where the research expertise is applied and where academia becomes part of a larger societal context. So this is what universities are normally doing, so to speak. And I think one could say that what we've been trying to do in the THALIA project is to bring all these parts together. We built on established research results regarding reporting on human trafficking in human beings. We brought the students out of the classroom and in direct contact with actors outside of the academia. And we teamed up with several organizations working with anti-trafficking in several ways. So the potential of actually contributing to the combating of human trafficking it lies in the fact that the students that we have engaged are soon to become journalists that will be reporting on this field. And if they stand better equipped to do so in a sustainable way, if they have been in direct contact with professionals working with anti-trafficking, if only for a brief moment during their education, I'm confident that this will make a difference.
Thank you very much, Urban. And I'm very happy to hear that you're bringing in perspectives from civil society, from reality, and you're bringing in the sustainability and the agenda that we all strive for as world citizens. So thank you very much, and it gets me very thrilled to know that this is what the students in one of the Swedish universities are learning about. And reviewing the students' journeys, because now you have been following some students working with these journalistic pieces. What benefits and new developments have you seen in specifically the THALIA project?
Well, first I want to say that the contributions by the students who participated in this context was very interesting to go through. And it would have been really nice to spend more time with each of them, to talk through their work, to give more detailed feedback and so on. And it makes me think of future developments of the THALIA project to actually organize post-panel seminar or post-contest workshops where the student work is shared between several countries, and inviting students from several countries to discuss the pros and cons of each work, which would mean not only continue talking about trafficking in human beings in itself, but also about how to design journalistic pieces that corresponds with sustainable principles. And I mean, this would also imply a cross-border dimension at the level of the students. And going through the student contributions, I especially found it interesting and relevant that many of them addressed in a direct manner potential victims of trafficking and or exploitation, and delivered information on what to think of if one is to embark, let's say, on a labor period in another country, or if one is the object of recruitment of some sort. What are the signals that should make you more cautious? What can you do if you suspect that all is not okay here? How do you prepare your own social network to mobilize action if needed? What are the public or NGO resources out there that you can turn to? And I think this is an interesting and relevant take that shows that the students are not mere learners, but they are also collaborators within this wider effort to combat trafficking. And the benefits and rewards for us teachers, I think, is that the panel seminars we have organized seem to have functioned as eye-openers for the students. Students of journalism are probably consuming news more frequently than other students, and if one takes research into account, they have probably not been presented with a nuanced, problematizing and socially sustainable image of the field through the mainstream media within their countries. But when the students were offered the chance to hear about the field from a variety of actors directly involved in anti-trafficking, a more complex picture came into sight. And going through the contributions for the contest and reading the evaluations of the panel seminars, it appears to me that the students have really made an effort to try and encompass this complexity in their work.
Thank you very much, and it's so inspiring to hear that you see the students as collaborators and that they've really done investigative journalism in the way to carry out also the information to the potential and vulnerable victims who are out there, how to reach for help or to gain information, and that's missing elements in our societies all over Europe. So I'm really looking forward to hear more about that and how the students can get more committed and to listen to each other, what you also said before. Very insightful remarks from you and from your students. My last question will be, how will you take this forward now at Södertörn University?
Well, this has been a pilot project, and we now need to evaluate how it has turned out in each country. I mean, project like this with so many people involved obviously implies a lot of work on formalities and bureaucracy and so on. And the university systems in the participating countries are different, and the character of the human trafficking field is also different. The relationship between state authorities and civil society actors does not look the same. So even if we could agree at the start of the project on certain sort of common principles on how to organize the panel seminars, the way it turned out in each case has been adjusted to local conditions. So when it comes to each team in each country, they now need to consider whether they want to organize new panel seminars or perhaps carry on focus on trafficking in other forms. But for the project as a whole, I would say that we have now sort of paved the way for cross-border collaborations and to team up and organize joint activities. Perhaps not in this larger constellation, but maybe country to country, let's say. And as I mentioned, where we can bring students from different countries together in what might be described as a comparative work, learning from each other and learning about the sort of cultural contingencies in other countries and so on. And I also want to say that it's been really stimulating to listen to earlier panels. And I want to thank again the CBSS team for organizing this conference. I mean, at the outset of this project, we teachers and researchers were considering actually adding some research dimension into this and perhaps come up with some collaborations regarding more strictly research. And I see the potential of this, and now we have a network that has been established through the THALIA collaborations, and we'll just have to see how or if we can find ways ahead on these more research paths, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Urban. And if I listen to you properly, I hear a very positive way forward, and that you have many new thoughts on how to involve the students and make them more interactive, them among each other and so on. So I really hope that you will have a continuation of your commitment. Please stay with us to the questions and answers. So from Sweden, we will move on to Lithuania to meet our final panelist of today. Good afternoon. Aukse Balciatiene at Vytautas Magnum University. How are you this afternoon?
Thank you.
Very great having you with us and your university. How did you start working on the thematic issue of human trafficking?
Thank you. That has been indeed a deeply engaging process. That would be my first reaction to describe the history, the feelings for teachers, but also for students. And looking back to the very early days of this year, to the very beginning of this year, I remember how excited we got when we got this invitation from the Nordic Council of Ministers Vilnius Bureau to join the project, even though we were not joining the project from the very beginning. But actually, I think we have been able to get all the kind of the icing from the cake, from the ideas, from the opportunities that were offered and brought by this project.
Thank you very much. Why did you get involved in such a project like THALIA project? What developments or benefits did you see in this?
Very good question indeed. Actually, from Lithuania, we were two universities, Vilnius University, and I'm very happy to see now Urte here with us in this podium among the winning students. And Vytautas Magnus University that I'm representing. And actually to tell a little bit more and to disclose the reasons where such a topic as human trafficking fits in within academic curricula, I have to tell you a little bit more about the Vytautas Magnus University and the culture of its studies. We are a liberal arts university, and naturally, when we look at liberal arts education, we always think that it stands on several pillars. And one of those pillars is, I would describe it as an openness, openness to challenges, kind of an open spirit, an open mind, and also an open heart, and also a sensitivity to surrounding realities. Other pillars are probably described as an attempt to metacognitively grow, to develop spaces for reflection. That's a kind of a regular mission at the university, but at liberal arts schools, we try to look at different problems as an integral problems. So if we would address human trafficking, we would also think of human trafficking on the same level as we would think of many complex social problems of societies of today. So this may be global warming, climate change, environmental issues, humanitarian crisis, also health crisis, and all these related complex issues that actually cannot be approached just from one disciplinary perspective. And I think today we have heard already from Estonian examples, and students collaborated from different study programs, and they have built a sort of a collaborative product. So to us, journalism is also such a discipline that can be described as a macro level discipline that is built on competences from different fields. It can be a field of history and anthropology or sociology, political science, international relations, also IT and computational studies. So all this integrative approach gives us specific instruments, cognitive skills and competences to approach very complex problems from a kind of an insight that we couldn't think from the very beginning. So even now I'm talking on a very general level, but even such a sensitive topic as human trafficking, we could see an approach from very different perspectives and observe it not only as for instance, sex exploitation, forced labor, but also as a field that touches upon such sensitive topics as human warfare. So these are all complex issues that can be studied within academic disciplinary structures. And for our students at Vytautas Magas University, we had a third-year bachelor level students who have taken part in this project. Certainly their sort of disciplinary background allows them already to tackle issues from perspectives that they would be able to identify as critically important for students of their age, young students, Z generation students. And many of them, they have chosen topics to cover, such as raising awareness, sort of sending an important message to students of their age, warning and designing social media products, not typical journalistic products, but social media products with a specific angle. And sometimes this angle was kind of promoting media literacy skills. So we can say that academia is, I would look at it as if it is a platform that gives a lot of possibility, a lot of space to experiment, a lot of space to talk, but also it creates a space to listen. And I think this is an essential part that allows critical reflection, allows metacognitive skills to be developed. And among those metacognitive skills, I would also include such elements as moral standing, ethical reporting and ethical communication. So to grow up those values, we need space. We need arena to discuss, because in many ways we would say that we live in a very highly accelerated conditions. There is a lot of information. So we do not have kind of problems to talk about different issues. We can use all the different means that are at the tips of our hands to communicate, to talk. But what we miss arenas and spaces to stop and to reflect. Academia, I would say it's still a greenhouse that allows that. Previously, I would say media and journalism was that arena. Nowadays, what we see, classical news media is struggling with different problems, economic problems, oversensitized and sensational reporting, and in many ways, it overgeneralizes. It doesn't have time to stop, to go and delve into details, into nuances. And only in those conditions that we delve into details and nuances, we can discover gaps in our thinking and our knowing. We can discover gaps in different, for instance, infrastructures that exist in our societies that allow crime, certain versions of crime to flourish. So I think we are losing this integral arena of media, academia, also educational institutions, schools, if we are not kind of bringing us back together. And I think THALIA was a brilliant project that has brought this sort of multi-stakeholder approach, but as you said in the very beginning of our panel, this whole of society approach.
Thank you very much, Aukse. And it's very interesting just to listen to you, bringing in all these perspectives on board, bringing in ethical thinking, how to reflect, excuse me, and the challenges of the integrated and interactive approach. It sounds like I want to come to you and continue to listen in the journeys you had with your students. So my last question would be, what has been most inspiring for you to see throughout this process?
For me, it was inspiring to see the final products that our students have come up. As I mentioned, they were bachelor level students, students not too young, but still students who are willing to play, who have still their open hands and open hearts. And we allowed that. And we thought that we at academia, even though we are teaching journalism, we do teach journalism. So we bring top important skills, techniques of journalistic reporting, but we also allow this space for experimentation. And I think we were happy and we were lucky that we had this space. Actually, I mentioned artes liberales logic of liberal arts education. I think for contemporary societies, it's really place to invest in this philosophy. And that was for me kind of paying back truly when I saw the outcomes of student products. To me, the finding was that reflection is needed, it's necessary, and through reflection we truly grow up, really grow up. And this growth, I have grown tremendously. That's my honest kind of confession. And thanks not only to students and to their ideas, but especially also thanks to very open heart that was brought by our collaborators here at in Lithuania, for instance, by specialists from the Ministry of Interior. I would strongly recommend to approach Sonata Mitskute if there is any need to know more about cases in Lithuania. I was so fascinated to learn about the kind heart of people, of lawyers who work in this field, which is very demanding and very highly stress surrounded. So I think we need to have a much more humanist approach to everything, to our everyday issues and problems. in the very beginning of my answers, I reflected that human trafficking is a complex problem. Environmental changes, global warming, it's a complex problem. Lost biodiversity, it's a complex problem. Human disinformation, living in post-truth society, these are complex problems. But if we look deeper, they are all related. We may see no kind of interconnections and parallels from the first sight. But again, we can see that these problems, these issues are really interrelated. And in each of those issues, there is this human perspective. And if we lose this humanist approach, if we do not see human in all those problems and cases, and suffering human in human trafficking issues, suffering human in global warming or environmental changes. I'm not talking probably in Lithuania, but there are spots on the planet where people indeed suffer because of global warming. Then I look at the border of Lithuania and Belarus at the current moment, I see lots of suffering humans, and they are direct victims of human trafficking, which is covered by other aims of foreign powers. So indeed, I think we need to remember that in this, we live in a highly interconnected planet, and we as humans are interconnected.
Thank you very much, Aukse, for giving us such a broad and vivid perspective. And thank you to all our panelists from the academia for your commitment and for your compassionate storytelling. Now we'll have a few minutes of questions from the audience, and we'll see if we have any questions. And I will start with this one to the students. Any one of you can answer, so feel free. What's the success story of a winning journalistic piece? I think it might be from one of your fellow students who didn't win, who are asking you for the success and for the elements that you made it with. Who wants to? Urte? Anastasia? What was the success of your winning piece?
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat the question?
The success story of a winning piece.
Success story of the winning piece? I don't know what it could be. Should it be like an advice or
I think so. I think maybe one from your fellow students who didn't win, they're asking you for your knowledge in what you.
Anyone would ask me any advice. I would say that if something doesn't go as you planned before. So just take this like an opportunity to make something different. So yeah. I think it is advice.
Good advice. And maybe a good advice from Anastasia in Ukraine as well?
Nastya agrees the previous speaker, and she also thinks that the most important piece in fear with people who you talk to, and you need to have a wish to change society, to change people's conditions where they live, wish to protect children, your family, and society from such problems as we just were talking about. And just not think about success if you're writing a piece. Think about the goal that you can achieve when you write a piece. And the most important is an attitude to another human. And it's important in all spheres of our lives, not only in journalism. And try not to harm, to make the worst for the person who interviewed.
Thank you very much, both Anastasia and Urte, for those very interesting advices that I hope your fellow students will pick up on. So to the professors, how could the topic of human trafficking be included in the curriculum in your universities? Urban and Auxe. Could it, or is it already now by this project or a continuation?
The topic of human trafficking.
Yes.
Yes, it's actually not particularly part of our curricula. It's more like we have been using this particular field, this particular topic as a kind of case study for the bachelor students in order to apply theories about journalism research onto a particular field and see what happens when you set theories in motion. So it's not like it's part of the curricula as such. And I mean, this is obviously because we are dealing with journalism practice, journalism theory, and so on. It could be another case, for example, in other disciplines such as social work or sociology or so on at our university. But I don't think it would become like a compulsory aspect of the curricula in our case.
Thank you. What about you, Auxe, in Lithuania?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Same situation as Urban has indicated, not included as such, but I would say that it comes and goes depending on the urgency of your reality, how reality dictates. I think what we have in academia, we are indeed very sensitive to social surroundings. So human rights issues, they are always on the agenda, and we have such classes as media activism, for instance. So once in a while, human trafficking issue might come in there. And also we do have classes where we offer our journalism students this sort of real life learning conditions by serving different community needs. So they really go into communities and they do small communications projects there. And very often they visit different NGOs, and that's how we grew up with human trafficking issues, because we had students who visited such organizations as Caritas, also NGOs that support victims of human trafficking.
Thank you very much, Auxe, and thank you very much to all of our students, and those of you with the winning pieces participating, and those of you who are with us online. It's time to close our third panel, and I hope that you've enjoyed listening to the students and the teachers and their very creative and interesting remarks on the role of academic actors in the global fight against trafficking in human beings. Let's hope that these future journalists and many more with their colleagues will help us to lead the way ahead in the actions that we really need. Thank you from me, and over to Eddie and Vineta.
And we are at the final mile of this conference closing remarks. Thank you again to all the speakers for reminding us how much knowledge, experience, expertise and passion we have for combating human trafficking, for engaging new actors and strengthening partnerships. It has been such a gratifying experience to work with the universities, with teachers, and of course with students. As we are now finalizing the conference and this day, let me please reassure you that this focus on expanding partnerships and including journalists and media in raising awareness on human trafficking will not end here. It just began, and we will continue this focus next year.
I would like to join Vineta in thanking all the speakers of today and all the panelists. And as a final remark, I would like to especially extend my congratulations to the students Reivo, Anastasia, and Urte, who just presented their journalistic work. And congratulate them for winning this competition, this call for contribution. Their work will be available on our website, cbss.org, where you can find all other human trafficking-related publications as well. I also would like to add that the winning students were the focus of this project. I mean, the students were the focus of this project, and the winning students were initially supposed to be with us here today in Stockholm, where we would award them today. But due to the pandemic, it was not possible to include them physically here today. However, we have not forgotten you. I want to assure that. And our organization is all about connecting people, and connecting people is also the core part of international cooperation. So to the winning students, I would like to announce that you will all receive a generous travel voucher, so that once this pandemic is over, you will be able to travel to any inspirational destination of your choice, once again, to network and meet with other people. So with that said, thank you everybody. We will meet for new adventures soon again, hopefully. And with that said, the conference is closed. Wishing you all a nice afternoon and evening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.